so cute.
And we are live.
It's this little girl, and her
Hi,
mom's
everybody.
like, "Why did you think you were going to the royal wedding?" And the little girl thought she was like legit, and she's like, "Am I not a real princess?" It's so cute.
Aww.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. And
Hello.
hello to people watching/listening on YouTube. You have come to the right place to hear everything. If you want
Everything?
everything. If you want the polished, edited version that will be available later, it is going to be at oncepodcast.com/350. This is episode 350.
Oh my gosh.
But for those of you who want to listen to us probably trip up quite a bit because this is such a non-standard episode and make long pauses to make editing easier so that we can have more hashtag thank you John and less hashtag sorry John, then stick around because that's what this is going to be.
Oh, we're doing great.
Okay.
I thought drinking kombucha would make my voice better for the podcast, but I think it might not.
What is kombucha?
Well, that is
Millennials.
That's
No, just
a
kidding.
post-show
Like,
discussion.
is this like, Jacqueline, maybe you should Google this instead of asking? Because I kind of feel like I know what it is, but it does. I'm going to look this up. What is
It's
this?
fermented tea. It's a probiotic drink.
She left her tea
Gotcha.
out too long.
Gotcha.
I left my tea out too long. Yeah, something like that.
I didn't know it was fermented
It is.
tea. TBH.
And this is how we spell it.
Kombucha.
And then that voice starts to whisper, "I want you to go so far."
Hey guys,
Yes.
do you want to do a podcast?
Do
Only if you
wanna
sing
do a
it.
podcast?
There it is.
Come on, let's press record.
We already did.
One last time.
Not saying that.
Okay.
Oh, Jacqueline, what were you? I know you weren't quoting anything, maybe, but when we said everything and you said everything, everything. What is that from?
I don't know. I wasn't.
I know, but
I
you said
wasn't
it in like the exact tone.
I don't know. Maybe it's something I've subconsciously internalized from something that I
Yeah,
don't remember.
I think it was.
Okay.
Everything. Okay, well, that's fine. That's just going to bug me for the rest of my life.
Wow. The stakes are high tonight, folks.
Somebody find out what that's from and tell Erin so she's not tormented for like the next 50 years.
Right.
Oh, it's all becoming clear. AJ is I Love Lana Parrilla and timeline. What timeline?
Oh, gotcha. Is it a meme? It sounds familiar. It's a quote from something. Like one person says everything, and then she goes, everything? Everything. It's like, that's why I thought it might be from Once.
Do I need to Google this now?
No, I don't. Well, try Googling everything 3 times and see if that brings you anything.
Try Googling it. That was strange. Okay, you
Yeah,
guys.
that's not going to work. Okay, cool. Let's just put that out of our minds.
Yep.
Well, there is a movie called Everything Everything,
Yeah.
but I don't know that that's.
No, it's just a quote.
But it turned out it was nothing. Nothing.
Okay.
All right, are we going to start now?
Yes. Would you like music?
Music. Percussion.
Music.
Winds. Words.
Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. I don't know.
There you see her.
Tick tock, dearie, tick tock.
Oh. Rumple.
Why did you have to make Jacqueline cry so early, Jeremy? We haven't even started recording. Well, we haven't started officially.
Right now we're just spewing all over the editor's floor.
That was a good accent.
Poor John. The first 8 minutes of this are basically nonsense.
We could always start again. But these are-
Hashtag sorry, John.
Oh, we can all clap. It brings fairies and editors back to life.
I hope someone's tweeting these quotes.
I'm doing that one right now.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Everybody in the chat room is crying. This is gonna be great, you guys.
It's if we pause in the middle for me to remember what that was. I hope that's okay. Have we started yet? No.
As long as you apologize to John afterwards, I think it's okay.
We have clapped, but have not actually started.
I only have enough disk space for 19 hours and 27 minutes, so.
Oh, but we were going to make this a 20-hour podcast, Jeremy.
Oh, I forgot.
Where do you see that? Like, is that on Audacity somewhere?
Yeah.
Where do
It
you
has
see?
a little status
Ooh,
bar at the bottom.
505 hours and 5 minutes.
Yeah, you got more hard drive space, apparently.
Yeah, because I don't put iTunes on here. Oh, but iTunes is open. Maybe I should close it.
You should. Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me. Excusez-moi. Are you ready?
No, I don't watch Doctor Who. I'm ready.
Doctor Who watching not required to start this podcast. Oh. Ugh, this is weird. Okay. Starting in 3, 2.
You're listening to Once, episode 350, Farewell Once Upon a Time. Hello and welcome back to Once, the unofficial podcast for ABC's TV show Once Upon a Time.
I'm Jeremy.
I'm Erin.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And we're here to say farewell to Once Upon a Time. And just basically cry altogether.
It's just an hour-long cry fest is what this podcast really is tonight.
Right.
It's just crying, guys.
So, we have recorded 349 episodes of Once podcast,
In various forms.
not counting the however many we recorded for the Once spin-off, Once Upon a Time in Wonderland.
True.
And this is episode 350.
Which seems so appropriate.
Very appropriate.
Or at least very even.
And because this is, well, because we've already had a full discussion about the finale, this is kind of our full discussion about the series as a whole.
And we're going to go scene by scene, so buckle up.
It all started with Emma sitting at a restaurant as a bail bonds person. I don't even think that's how it started. Is that
It's
how
not.
it started?
No, it's Charming riding through
Oh,
the woods
yeah.
on his horse. But
Sorry,
got
I
what you were
was
going with
counting
that.
as present day.
True. It's been a long time.
Oh man,
7 years.
7
Yeah. years. And sort
And
of
we
7.5, because it started in the fall, so
yeah.
it's been
Yeah.
7 years since season 1 ended.
And we kind of
Or not.
had high expectations of our listeners when we were like, hey, just send us some short feedback for us to include about your favorite moments from the show.
Right.
And we got a lot of feedback,
We did.
and we read all the feedback, and we have tried to include as much of it as possible. And yeah, I don't know what else to say there.
Now, some of it may be edited for time,
Yes.
and we may stop to discuss your words.
And we kind of have we have actually three kind of separate feedback sections. We have Jacqueline, who is going to be heading up the forum feedback discussion with
Yep.
some highlights from the forums, since she is queen of that realm.
Yes.
The good queen. Get
The
it
good
right.
queen. Oh, are you the good queen?
I am now.
Okay.
And probably
just
also
a
the mayor.
conspiracy theorist good queen.
Also the mayor, mainly because I want to say, time to put your mayor pants on.
And then we also want to share your favorite moments. We're going to share our favorite moments. It's going to be just kind of it's going to be an episode of closure. We all need some closure. And I think my favorite part is going to be sharing your feedback on how the show has changed you, or how it impacted you, or how your life has changed since you started watching the show. I really enjoyed reading those. So I'm really excited to share those with everyone. Uh-huh. You guys are being so quiet.
I know. It's such a different format for us.
Yeah.
And I my brain is searching for plot to talk about.
And there is none.
And there is none. So
So let's
Shall
just jump
we-
right in.
jump right into the portal of feedback. Except now we don't jump in, because actually as of late it's become a spinning orange circle that just goes in front of us so we can walk into it instead of jumping.
Yeah. Or drive a beignet truck.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that one.
All right. Hop in, everyone.
We're also going to play a little game. Follow along at home. We're going to see how many times we can say beignet in this episode. Since that's what season 7 was all about.
Does it count if we say bayonets?
Yep.
It just has to be close to the word beignet.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Well, I will start us off reading some feedback from Melanie. Hold on. Already.
Or not.
So you this will obviously be sidebar. You made a bit of a synopsis. Is that what's going on here? Let me get
I
to
think just for this one.
Okay.
If I had to cut it, I tried to. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I
Gonna
got lazier with that
Take
as I.
the colon out,
went.
so I'm not confused.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, Emily, fighting with sound. Okay, we'll have a pause and we'll start that again. Thank you.
Sorry, the cola just disappeared for me right when that happened. So. Okay, we'll have another pause.
Melanie shared her favorite moments with us, and her top 3 were Snow and Charming's story about how they met, the original one specifically, not the one changed by time travel. I would agree with that. Emma believing, fighting with Regina, and kissing Henry to break the curse. And Charming's line about Thanksgiving, because it shows how everyone is connected and acknowledges that, yes, it is a little crazy how they are all connected.
I loved all 3 of these moments, and I think part of why I loved reading all this feedback was being reminded of all the moments that I had kind of forgotten about.
Right. I
Yeah.
kind of wanted to go back through. I really wanted to sort of review the whole series and look at every episode and figure out what my favorite moments really were. And then I realized I probably would come up with some more. But if they were truly my favorites, I probably already have them in my head. I have a nice little list. So those are
True.
probably if they stood out for this long, they probably are my true favorites.
I love the Thanksgiving line that Melanie mentioned.
I don't
It's probably one of my
remember it.
favorites. It's a good thing we don't have Thanksgiving in our realm, because that dinner would suck. It's right after they realize that Neil is really Balefire, is Rumple's son, and how they are all connected. And it's As soon as that line was said, I instantly wanted a Thanksgiving dinner at some point in this show. Like, I just wanted them all sitting around a Thanksgiving table, this huge, slightly ridiculous and silly family having a dinner.
Maybe at Granny's
Maybe at Granny's.
as a parting
It's-
shot for the
As
end
a
of the
parting
season.
shot.
So that was a 2B line? Season 2B?
Yeah, yeah. That was Manhattan, which is 214.
Oh. Speaking of Manhattan, I didn't know that that was from Manhattan. My feedback that I was going to share from Brian is if I had to go with one favorite moment, because I think a lot of us have more than one, he said, our favorite episode, I guess, is he's talking about, is 214 Manhattan. He said, to me, that episode was borderline flawless. And I was excited to share this because that is definitely one of my favorite episodes. I agree that it was flawless at the time, anyway. And some of my very favorite scenes are from that episode as well.
That episode remains my second favorite episode in the entire series. There's one that beats it out, but it's real slim. But yeah, that episode to me was just perfect. I loved it so much.
I would say that's my second favorite as well. So, fist pump.
I would say that it's largely in the vault that is where season 2 resides in my brain. But I now will perhaps go rewatch that episode specifically.
I could reenact some of the scenes for you right now if you want.
As tempting as that is.
There is a line in that episode where I was like, I want to be able to put this into everyday conversation so bad, but it will never happen. And it's when Emma looks at Neil and says, you left me and let me go to prison because Pinocchio told you to? So good.
Well, speaking of Neil, Brian also sent us some more feedback about one of the biggest mistakes that the show ever made. Because you might have favorite moments, but we also have least favorite moments. And for Brian, the biggest mistake, no doubt, was killing off Neil. Especially when I read it wasn't because the actor wanted out of the show, it was just a boneheaded decision made by the showrunners. And if anyone has been listening to this podcast for any length of time, they already know all my opinions on that. Which I'll share before the night is over again.
And Jacqueline, I think you can also speak to the listeners' feedback on that. Like that was probably one of the most controversial moments of the show in the forums and in your experience kind of wrangling feedback like you do in that context.
Yeah. Everything leading up to that, because very early on in January, we had a spoiler that one of the main cast members was leaving permanently and that his character would be killed off. And if my co-mod Matt is listening, he will attest to the fact that we got very little sleep that hiatus, that we spent our entire winter break breaking up fights and trying to put people in separate corners. Because instantly, a lot of people said Neil, a lot of people said Belle, and a lot of people said Hook.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And then episode 315 happened, and it was Neil, and yeah. The feeling seemed to be either it was the single biggest mistake the show ever made, and you were very angry, and a lot of people stopped watching. And then the other half was, we're sad for Henry, and we're sad for Rumple, but we don't care that much about his character to be that upset about it. And, you know, those feelings kind of just festered for a long time.
I would say, or I remember having a somewhat lengthy monologue while we podcasted about that episode about how, like, there's still hope. And I think the show was trying to show that you can have this very, very horrendous, awful situation and come back from it. And you can still have a happy ending. Because I think a lot of the feedback was like, well, they're taking away all their happy endings. Like Emma's, Henry's, Rumple's. And then that was kind of where I was at. But yeah, given that there was so much I do know a lot of people that stopped watching at that time as well.
I do remember that, and it was almost like the problem, I guess, was always we weren't sure how intentional they were being. There were all these lessons we could take from what was done. We just were kind of questioning, did they mean it like that, or did they just sort of mess up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I think one week they would always say something a little deeper like that, but then there'd be these throwaway lines like the beginning of season 7 where Henry goes, "You did it, you brought back all the happy endings." Like, but I thought we had a happy beginning.
Yeah.
And I thought endings weren't good, which was actually the more consistent message of the show.
I wonder if it was kind of like in Once Upon a Time in Wonderland. They started out as the theme being nothing is impossible in Wonderland. And then they very kind of subtly changed that language to being everything is possible in Wonderland, which, yeah, like ultimately that's the exact same message, really, if you want to get technical.
That's true.
But I wonder if they just threw that language around to appease us because we held very tightly to the pilot for a very long time. And Henry always said, "You're going to bring back the happy endings." And then their journey was kind of discovering that every ending is a happy beginning. I don't know. Might be a stretch.
Yeah, they did try to bring us closure that we demanded. Some demanded the final battle closure a little more than others. That definitely got done too.
Yes.
So Matthew R. sent us an overall favorite moment, which was for him season 3, episode 11, which was called "Going Home." And it was the season 3 mid-season finale. And as he describes it, as Pan's curse descends upon Storybrooke, Emma and Henry bid a tearful farewell to their family and friends at the town line as they leave Storybrooke for New York. Regina reveals that they will lose their memories of Storybrooke, but gifts them new memories of Emma raising Henry. 2.5 seasons in, and the cast had built up such strong relationships, everything about this scene resonated. If once it ended there and then, I would have been satisfied. I'm glad it didn't, as there was much more to come, but honestly, that Neverland arc was brilliant, and this moment encapsulated the character relationships perfectly. And Matthew, I agree. That moment was on my list.
Oh.
For all those reasons. It was just such a good moment, and there was a question of it seemed like Storybrooke was gone. It could have been a series finale, but you knew it wasn't, because before they even closed the episode, there was Hook at the door saying they had to come back, and they didn't know who he was.
I don't
In a
think I
way,
realized.
Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think I realized that was a mid-season finale, as I'm remembering, because everything's kind of meshed together in my head. But
Right.
I do remember that season, and I guess I do remember now that Hook came to the door. But
Right.
that would have been a good series finale too.
Yeah. They got really good at ending the show.
Well, I think in a way I've heard people talk about this before, but that in a way episode 311 Going Home kind of is a bit of a series finale. People sometimes break Once Upon a Time into like 3 different sections. You have Once Upon a Time A, which is season 1 through 311. Once Upon a Time B, which is 3B up until the end of season 6. And then depending on what you want to say, either the epilogue or the spin-off or the reboot, which is season 7. 311 serves as kind of the end of the first story of Once Upon a Time. And the writers even said as much. They talked about a giant red reset button that they hit at the end of 311 by taking the curse back and like, okay, we told that story, let's tell something else. And so,
Right.
The rest of it up until the end of season 6 is kind of not a different show, but also kind of a different show.
Right. But the same town, because they got really good at putting that clock tower in.
Yeah.
They really did.
That wasn't even so. A lot of people sent I guess, Jacqueline, you can talk about this more. There was something going around the forums that was like kind of a survey of everyone's favorite moments, least favorite moments, legacy, favorite episode. And so Keeper of Squid Ink sent in his entire, like his copy of that. But what I really liked were it was like, what is the legacy of Once Upon a Time? And I laughed out loud for some of these. So one, which I completely agree with, Mark Isham's That's Wrong. One, which I completely agree with, Mark Isham's soundtrack for the series. I think it's iconic. I think that people will be listening to it. I don't know. I hope he puts out another chapter of that. Oh, and total sidebar, we'll link it in the show notes. He did release on SoundCloud the finale music.
Yeah, he's actually got a lot up there from once and from other projects.
My favorite, unfortunately, I don't know if it's my favorite, but one of my top 5 scores for the series was from Wonderland, and it was Will and Anastasia's theme, and it took us forever to find it, and then Matthew found it, and he sent it to me, and it's not by Mark Isham, which is probably why it was so hard to find.
Oh, I see.
I don't remember who it was by.
Can we link that in the show notes too?
Yeah, we can. Yes.
So you haven't lost it. Good.
So I have it on my phone. No, it's a really good score. So Keeper of Squid Ink, he said Mark Isham's soundtrack for the series. 2, people still need and want a happy ending. 3, why you should hire the nerd obsessed fans. Sorry, I'm going to say that again. Why you should hire the nerd obsessed fans and a good podcast to support a TV show. That's not even right. Sorry. I'm sorry, John. 3, why you need hire the nerd obsessed fans and a good podcast to support a TV show. 4, why networks should not change a show's time slot. 5, if you plan to do a reboot, choose wisely. The timelines alone would make one's head spin. I liked this because we got a lot of feedback from listeners that said they only kept watching the show because they wanted to keep listening to the podcast.
I know. Like we heard that for years. And so sometimes I thought, well, maybe ABC should pay us. But never happened.
They should have paid us and occasionally flown some of us out there to have like consulting meetings.
Yes. And by some of us, she means herself.
I do, in fact, mean myself. I would gladly take some of you, but yeah, no, mostly I kept waiting for the phone to ring and Adam to just be like, hey, it's Adam and Eddie. You want to come out and have a chat? Yes. Yes, I do.
Hashtag hire the nerd.
What I find hilarious is that like throughout these 7 years, so the show was on for 7.5 years, like what's changed with media and how shows run and how so in the middle of these 7 years, I don't remember which, probably around season 2 or 3 of Once, other shows started, and they started hard. They started let's do Twitter live tweeting, let's do a podcast. They, for a while, ABC did have an official Once podcast. Mm-hmm. And they had an official podcast for a bunch of their other shows where writers and actors and whatever would be guests on it, which I find really interesting because I guess podcasting has changed so much in the past 7 years too.
ABC tried something at the beginning of season 2 that was my favorite thing ever. A comedian named Ali Ward recapped their episodes every week for weeks, and she was hilarious.
Oh.
She made it funny. So we should try to find some of those if we can. We'll link to some of those in the show notes as well. I was so sad when she stopped doing it.
Oh, I didn't realize that had happened. That was before I was on the podcast, I think.
Yes, we'll Yes, there is fun to be had once we find those.
Well, and I'm also looking forward to listening to Jacqueline and Hunter's spoilers.
True.
Right. You've got like how many years worth of our spoilers now to listen to? And you can, I mean, really what you need to listen to is our dramatic reenactments of script teases,
Oh,
which I think were big hits with everybody. It's really great.
I think we got some feedback about that too.
Great. Leanne sent in a favorite moment, and she said that hers is probably the Belle and Rumple wedding, and then the dance in the episode after. It was just the best. Which, yep. Yeah. Hashtag not over it yet.
I mean, it was okay. No, I'm just kidding.
Shush.
And similar to that, or mentioning sort of the same things, Kina wrote to us, "Thanks for everything you do. I'm truly going to miss this podcast, but everything must come to an end. So my favorite moment for the final season is from the episode Beauty, when Rumbell get to somewhat grow old together. My favorite moment overall is from season 6, episode Heartless, when the evil queen puts the sleeping spell on Charming and Snow. That was great writing."
That was such great writing.
Well, thank you, Kina. Those are kind words. And they did get to grow old together.
I love
Except
that episode from season
Rumple
7.
was already old, but just timelessly old. Old-ish, not that old.
That was a really great season 7 episode. And I wasn't a huge fan of Rumble even being together, but that episode that was when he really like legit changed.
Yeah, and I was actually very happy that they did it that way, because they gave us real payoff to all the back and forth. They had more good years by far in the end than they had bad flip-floppy years.
Yeah. I love that episode, as I think, most people would expect me to, from start to finish. And one of my very favorite moments, I'll go ahead and share it now, from the entire series is in that episode where they talk about building a house in that realm that they're in. And Rumple kind of raises the dagger to just, quickly do it by magic. And Belle stops him and says, no, let's do it the old-fashioned way. And Rumple, without any hesitation, throws the dagger on the ground. And I remember watching that episode live, and I just burst into hysterical tears. Because for, 6.5 years, I had been back and forth with this character. He was the reason I came to Once Podcast. He was the reason why I stayed for a really long time. And it was always hard to be Rumple's girl when Rumple was being such an idiot. But that moment, I was like, there he is. There's my imp.
Aww.
And I just cried.
Aww.
And he turned out to be really good at building houses for some reason.
Yes, with his bare hand.
With his bare hands.
He could have had a
And
whole
Belle,
different
too.
business in Storybrooke.
To speak to the end of that feedback, I remember Daniel and I doing initial reactions to the episode Heartless. And I can't remember exactly the wording, but I think Daniel started with something like, and I think I speak for everyone when I say, and him and I just pretended to burst into tears because when they got cursed, like it was such good writing, but it was so heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, cursed hearted. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it lasted. It was a super creative way for them to job share since they were raising their family in real life. And it worked so well for the story.
Yeah, and, every chance Lana Priya gets to do something a little different and be amazing at it is just that much better.
Yeah. And season 6, like for me, was a really rough season. And, I think one of the highlights of us picking apart our favorite moments and our least favorite moments is finding the diamonds in the rough of that.
Yeah.
Michael R. shared about the musical episode being one of his favorite moments. He said this episode completely encompasses all that is beautiful and magical about this series, and I was so thrilled they were able to give us that feeling again so late in the game. Snow and Charming at their best, the evil queen at her worst, the wedding, and Emma's incredible transformation from a lonely young woman into the savior, surrounded by people she had come to love and who loved her on her wedding day, was a perfect story to her. Was a
Yeah.
perfect way to end her story. Not to mention the music was so much fun.
Yeah, that episode was kind of a masterpiece and
Yes.
a gift.
Yeah.
It's amazing because it sort of encapsulates the story. So if you just miss Once Upon a Time and want to go sort of revisit everybody and everything, just go watch that. Or
Yeah.
listen to the songs in your car or whatever. And when they hired the guys that composed those songs, they hired the musical nerds. Like reading or listening to the interviews of how they went about it, it's really amazing. I believe those were in the special features from season 6.
Oh, I'll have to check those out. I will share now that was definitely in my top 5 favorite episodes / moments. And from that episode, there was a line that Henry said. He just said, "She's not alone. She never was." And I really loved that line when Emma realized that she had had this love in her family, in her heart the whole time, her whole life. And I think that's what every like abandoned child wants to know and wants to feel like, oh, I was abandoned for a reason, but it wasn't because they didn't love me. Like, yeah, it was just beautiful. And then on a funnier note, when Charming starts singing for the first time.
Yes. Yes.
When he just like bursted. That was amazing. Like that was my like second favorite of all time Josh Dallas scene.
That episode is probably one of the biggest shocks for me. Because when they announced that they were going to do it, I could not help but roll my eyes.
Right.
You know, they had been hounded for years about, are you ever going to do a musical? And the answer was always no, and no, that we don't know. We're not musical writers. And then stuff started coming out about it, and I remember watching the promo and having to talk about it in the spoiler podcast with Hunter. And we were both cringing at some of the things that were happening in the promo. And then in the days leading up to the actual episode, they released every single song, and everybody basically fell head over heels in love with everything that was happening. I couldn't believe how good it was.
Yeah.
I love Snow and Charming's song, and Emma's stand against the Black Fairy and her theme that she sings was so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was also a moment of whole cast character development or story character development, if that's a thing, as we finally see them come to this point where, yeah, all this bad stuff keeps happening, but they finally get that they're going to win regardless.
Yeah. Great series finale for sure.
Right. When I think about the wrapping up of the original characters' story arcs, I sometimes, if I'm being honest, forget about the final battle. I just think about this. I think about the wedding and the end of it, and it's almost like whatever happens after the wedding doesn't matter because they'll win.
Right. Michael R. sent in some of his favorite moments, and he said, Rumple and Belle's love story as told in the flashbacks throughout Skin Deep. This will forever be my favorite episode of the show. Robert Carlyle and Emily DeRavin, as well as Jane Espenson, gave these two characters so much depth and so many beautiful and complex layers that they became the most intriguing and dynamic relationship the show ever explored to me. And yes, that is my very, very favorite episode of the entire series. It beats out Manhattan by just a little bit. I mean, that episode is the reason I decided to join the fandom. I had been kind of watching from a distance. It was only 11 episodes, that's episode 12, but I had kind of been watching from a distance, and this episode aired, and I was just like, I will dedicate my life to this show. um, and I remember just going to Google and like typing in Once Upon a Time theories, because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, was theories. And Once podcast was the first thing that popped up, and the forums had just opened. So I instantly clicked join, and that's the story of Rumpelstiltskin. That's how I came to the forums.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Sorry, I was adding a note elsewhere. Sorry.
That's okay.
What is the one here?
It's just some people like listed. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Are there other numbers? Do I need to say that?
I think I just put the one.
Okay,
because,
sorry.
Yeah.
Because you just took his first one. Okay.
I just took the first one and then like some stuff at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tiernan also sent in some of his... You know what? I'm going to stop and make a longer pause. Tiernan also sent in some of his favorite scenes. And of course, a lot of these things that we're reading are excerpts again. So some of them, if there was a favorite or a least favorite, there was a lot more. And we love it. And we read all of it. But as you can tell by this point, for the sake of time, we are compressing things a little bit. But Tiernan writes, my number one scene of all Tiernan writes, my number one scene of all of Once Upon a Time is the only scene which caused me to cry uncontrollably. This is when Belle forced Rumpel over the town line with the dagger. Seeing Belle finally give up on Rumpel is heart-wrenching, but the nail in the coffin was when he falls to his knees on the other side of the town line, unable to walk or see Belle again. Thank you so much for this amazing podcast. I started listening since season 4, and it has made the show so much more enjoyable. I've been meaning to send in feedback since then, but I haven't. Erin mentioned that when watching the series finale, she thought, Jeremy won't like that. I realized I actually do the same thing when I'm watching. Wouldn't watch the show without this podcast, baby. Love y'all. Well, thank you, Tiernan. It's fantastic to know I'm the negative voice in people's heads.
Well, every single
Negative.
But no, yes, I appreciate that. It's been so fun having everybody come alongside me for moral support when Squid Ink is mentioned.
Yes.
I couldn't have made it without everybody's carrying words when I need some Squid Ink therapy or something.
So wait, do I have a thing like that? Like, so Jacqueline's is like when Rumbell has drama. We are all like, you okay, Jacqueline? You're doing okay? And yours is like you have these like very specific things you don't like Wish Realm, Squid Ink, Burning Red Room. Do I have a thing like that? No, I'm serious. Now I'm trying to think of like what my thing is.
I think when I realize that a plot is going to touch on larger social issues, I start to think, this is going to be great. What is Erin's take on this going to be?
Oh,
I think
nice.
anytime it's clear that they're referencing or could reference Buffy or Charmed, I'm like, Erin's going to bring that up.
That is true. We got the most feedback about those references. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I am a human and not this like just neutral, unbiased voice. Yes. But that's good. I love Buffy and Charmed, and I think that I have a lot of opinions about social issues, so I'll go with that. And apparently I also rant and say that everyone was going to have only favorite moments in season 1 and 2. So when Lindsay sent in her feedback, she said, this is such an unpopular opinion. But my favorite scene of all time was actually in season 5. It was the episode Dreamcatcher 505, when Emma held the Dreamcatcher to her chest and started crying because it reminded her of Neil. Thank you guys for the podcast. Even though I love Emma and Neil, I don't remember that episode.
That's maybe the only episode I actually enjoyed in season 5A, because season 5A to me doesn't exist.
Oh.
It's like the season I refuse to talk about. But I do remember that moment. I remember that episode. There were a lot of swan fire feels in that episode that my friends had to deal with as I like unloaded on them later. But yeah, Lindsay, I agree. Good moment.
I
You
did
guys are reminding
enjoy
me
the
of new
recurring.
favorite. Sorry.
I did enjoy the recurring theme of the Dreamcatcher.
Yeah. We also got feedback from Gareth, who listed several of his favorite moments, including creative backstories. I loved how they explained the genie of the lamp becoming the magic mirror, and in Red Handed when so many stories collided, like Peter and the Wolf, Three Little Pigs, Red Riding Hood, and we discovered that Red is actually the wolf. He also enjoyed sacrifice. Some of my favorite moments are when characters make a sacrifice either for one specific person or for the greater good. Like in 222, I love how Regina is willing to sacrifice herself to deal with the failsafe. And then Emma comes back to join with her to stop it, and it makes that moment even better. Another great example is in 311, Going Home, when Regina gives up Henry in order to stop Pan's curse, and then she gives Emma and Henry happy memories. He also really liked Snow and Regina, like in the episode Unforgiven, when Snow and Regina stand under the umbrella and Snow risks sharing her secret with Regina. This is an example of many great moments between them later in the series, which show the development of their characters. And finally, he also liked the villain arc endings, like Ingrid's, which he thought was the best. Her ending was both sad and happy, call it bittersweet. At the end, she got what she wanted, plus the music was fantastic.
The music always stands out when I think about that scene.
Yeah.
It was almost too fantastic. It was like a departure from a lot of the way the other parts of the soundtrack of the show were written. But it fit somehow, and it was beautiful. But it's weird how it... Maybe it's because of the vocals.
Yeah, there were not often vocals, which is...
Right.
There were also vocals in the Will and Anastasia theme I mentioned earlier, which is probably why it stood out at the time and then continues to stand out just because it's great. So yeah, vocals were not often used. And I agree about Snow and Regina. That was one of the biggest kind of character developments was those two kids.
I'm trying to remember that scene.
I don't remember the
umbrella.
scene specifically, but just the character development between the two of them. Like Snow was the whole reason Regina cast the curse. And then in the finale, Snow is crowning Regina the good queen. Like it's just beautiful.
Oh, that is... So yeah, 2 or 3 of my favorite moments are those two. Before I read this last one, Hunter is available. Did we have... Where were we planning? Because we thought we're a little behind schedule. So where were we planning to...
After this, we're just going to read the... We can put her in for the next part.
Oh, yeah, for the forums, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah, forums too. After that.
Okay.
Yeah.
After that. Here, actually, I will... Yeah, you do that. I'll do this, and we can continue recording.
That's fantastic.
That made
All right.
any sense.
Not entirely, but as long as you know what's happening, I'm going to just read this feedback. Okay. Pause. A moment of silence for the editor. Wait. And we have feedback from DeAndre, another one of our longtime faithful feedback writers. He's got a list of several episodes. Potentially, it appears in chronological order.
He did just figure out the whole timeline, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, it's all figured out, huh? Well, we'll have to look into this further. So, season 1, episode 2, The Thing You Love Most. After Regina tricks Emma in calling what Henry believes to be true to be crazy, Emma tells Regina that she has no soul. That's a favorite moment. That's awesome. Season 3, episode 6, Ariel. When Ursula threatens Regina after she pretends to be her. Okay, I think DeAndre's theme seems to be some sass.
Keep reading.
Season 4, episode 22, Operation Mongoose Part 2, when David kills Hook.
Keep going. It gets better.
Season 5. This one came in kind of on the late side. I haven't read this yet. Season 5, episode 11, Swan Song, when Emma kills Hook. Season 6, episode 14, page 23, when Cupid's arrow lands in Regina's wardrobe after she enchants it to find the person she hates the most, and she's staring at her reflection. Yeah. Season 6, episode 16, Mother's Little Helper, when Blackbeard threatens Hook's life. And season 7, episode 2, A Pirate's Life, when we find out that Hook in H-Town is actually Nook. That one wasn't mean at all. Least favorite, season 5, episode 21, Last Rites. Hook comes back right after Robin's funeral.
DeAndre, I'm just curious. Do you dislike the character of Hook?
At first, I wanted to rip out his throat. But I
Actually,
didn't.
Jeremy, yeah, you really didn't like him. I remember Queen of Hearts, which is one of my faves, probably my favorite episode. It's listed as my favorite, allegedly. You really did not like Hook back then. You did not. You had not nice things to say about him.
I know, but now I know that's wrong.
Because people can change.
Yeah, it took him a long time to be... Well, it took him kind of a long-ish time to really change, but it also took them a long time to properly acknowledge that he had to change. It was almost, for me, like they flipped him from villain to hero with no acknowledgement that he had ever been a villain, and I was just mad about it. And then finally, they had some really awkward moments, like him kind of being like, "Hey, Belle, sorry I tried to kill you that time. We good?" But at least just even saying it was helpful for my healing. I still think in the end I might like Nook better than Hook somehow, which is strange, but...
No. I also like Nook better than Hook. I will never be on that train. I'm sorry. It's just not something I can do.
Well, there was the great story with Neil, and then Hook was the usurper. But I got used to him.
You can tweet me your angry feedback about not liking Hook at punk. Yeah, no. I'm washing my hands of that whole affair as soon as this podcast is over.
I have given people permission to tweet hate to me via Twitter so many times, and it's never been done. So
Aww.
That's true.
People must agree with us.
Or they want to be nice at least.
Do you know who's really nice to us?
Who, Aaron?
Our heroes?
Yes.
They are really nice to us, and they don't tweet us hate.
No,
and
they
we
don't.
love them. We love them. In fact, they've kept the show, I always want to say on the air,
Hey,
but it's
John,
actually
it's Hunter.
online. What's happening?
I'm sorry. I was just saying, let John know where I was with the podcast.
You're a ghost today?
I did not know I turned off mute. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Hi, Hunter.
Okay. Sorry, John.
I don't think John even knows what happened because Hunter's not recording yet.
Oh.
I was starting my recording on my side. I was gonna say, hey, we're at this point.
That's so funny. Since we're kind of in a paused moment, are you still having mic trouble?
I am. If you
Okay.
can't tell.
I
I'm
was
trying
gonna
to
say
change it
it
to the
sounds
mic.
echoey, so I wasn't sure if it was on the right mic or.
Okay, let me play around with it because I have to record. It's messed up.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
What was that?
I'm moving things.
It sounded like water, and I thought you were maybe drowning. But no, the echo was fantastic because it just made you so ghostly. And I was just hearing this voice. I was like, oh no, what's going on?
Okay,
It's
I'm
season
muting
5.
myself again while I try and figure this out.
Okay.
okay. And Daniel's shouting at you, so you can.
Yeah, I saw.
Okay.
That was fantastic.
Okay.
All right, we'll have a moment of silence again. I think I know where I left off too. I always want to say our heroes keep us on the air, but I guess they keep us online because there have been costs to all of this, and there will continue to be some, perhaps not as much as in the past. But for this episode, we'd like to thank Lisa Slack, Lisa R., James Kinslow III, Marianne Lavati, Heather Peckfelder, Jill Sherrod, Greg Shope, and our 18 heroes on Patreon. So many of you have been so faithful for so long, so thank you, and I think our entire audience thanks you at this point because you've helped keep us going.
And they definitely help to keep the forums running.
Yes.
Bless them.
Jacqueline, you got a lot of. Oh,
go ahead.
Jacqueline, there was a lot of feedback in the forums from listeners about their favorite moments and stuff as well, correct?
There was, we all kind of came together to discuss our favorite and least favorite moments for this series after it ended. And some people had, I thought, some really good ones. So Galthiera said that the idea that we are both is good advice, and that each of us is much too complex to be perfectly self-consistent.
Oh, I like that.
Which, yeah, I really like that, the way he worded it.
I'm a Gemini, so I really like that.
Stelop said that Cora trying to steal Emma's heart and it not working at the end of season 2A is one of her favorites, as well as Emma asking Hook out on a date. She has watched that scene over and over again. The Watcher said that the greatest thing about Once Upon a Time for her will always be their treatment of the villains, giving them backstories and personality and showing that evil isn't born, it's made. I loved the ups and downs this show had when it comes to showing how it isn't always easier trying to do the right thing, and that sometimes even bad people had good intentions or vice versa. And then Bibliophile said that her favorite moments are Belle falling into Rumple's arms while trying to pull down the drapes from Skin Deep, and then Rumple overcoming his fears to kill his father and himself and save the town from the episode Going Home.
Which
seems to be a big hit with a lot
Rumple.
of people. So nice they did it twice. And then also Wicked Regal sent in some of her favorite moments and said that Regina ultimately blessing Henry and Emma with new memories of a better life while she's giving them up to undo the very curse that she cast. This, I believe, was the first real milestone in her redemption arc. And then Regina getting closure with both of her parents and seeing them through to heaven in season 5B is also one of her favorite moments. And then just before the finale aired, Wicked Regal, who has been with the forums almost as long as I have, wrote a really, really beautiful letter. And I'm going to read a little bit of it because I think it kind of sums up how a lot of us feel over there at the forums. So she wrote, "It's been 7 years. We've all been a part of each other's lives, not just through the show, but so much more. It's been the ride of a lifetime. I don't know what will become of our forums after the last chapter airs tonight, but you guys will always be the best part about this experience. The friendships, the laughs, the crazy theories, the predictions, the fun, the jokes, and yes, even the numerous fights that Rumple's girl and Matthew Paul had to break up. We've enjoyed Once Upon a Time when it was at its best and survived it when it was starting to become at its worst. The journey of the show may end tonight, but I'm happy that the bonds we formed over the last 7 years will last forever. Thank you for 7 magical years, Forum family, and thank you for everlasting friendships. Which, yeah.
Aw.
That was 2 hours before the finale, and she made me cry a lot. So,
Aw.
That's great.
and then there were also some least favorite moments that the forum sent in. Specifically, AKA, Jiminy's Journal, and Bibliophile all list Neil's death as their least favorite moment. Our forum kind of became known as a bit of a safe haven for Neil fans. After his death, people could come and complain about the lack of Neil, and so it's not really surprising that our forums definitely list his death as the most tragic. And then both Wicked Regal and Michelle said that one of their least favorite moments was kind of just season 7 overall. Not that it was terrible, but that because so many of our regular cast members were missing, the story didn't involve them, that for them, you know, maybe season 6 really was the end, and season 7 is this thing that they just kind of had to contend with.
You know what's funny? I by the end of season 7, I almost forgot, but the beginning of season 7 was the most fun I've had with Once Upon a Time in a couple of years. I think because
Yeah.
initially there wasn't enough magical stuff happening to worry about timelines. They were kind of in this little bubble. There was nothing much to be consistent with. It was all new. They kind of had this second chance, but then, you know, later on, it just went timeline explosion and and continuity explosion, and just it got really complicated and really strange. It was still fun, but it made up for the peaceful beginning. So I think 7A-ish I actually really loved.
There's a lot about season 7 that I quite like. I like anything that was with Rumple or Regina and Henry. I loved Nook and Alice, especially
Yep.
Alice. More Alice.
Yeah.
Always more Alice.
Yeah.
There were definitely things I didn't like, and it always comes back to when they try to do too much plot, like
Yep.
with Gothel, like throwing in Jack / Nick / Hansel / the Candy Killer. Like
Right.
that that was nonsense. But when it's about those characters, even if they're characters that are technically brand new, like Alice and Nook, they did those guys really, really well.
Yeah.
And I would have gladly watched a full season 7 of just those characters.
Yeah. Alice very quickly didn't feel like a new character.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think too with her, we got moments with her and Nook that people had been asking for between Emma and Charming for years. Like people were asking for those character moments for years and never got them because there was so much plot. And I think
Right.
that they did a little bit of a better job toward the end of focusing on the relationships and the characters. Or maybe just we did a better job at forgetting the plot holes. And we focused more on the characters. But
Right. Well, I think Alice, I mean, everybody's damaged in some way, right? But like Alice had some pretty traumatic things in her past, but her damage was kind of almost opposite of Emma's in a sense, where Emma just put up wall after wall after wall. Alice was just like, please, let's tear down every wall between me and every other person in existence because I love everybody.
yeah.
And so she was just way, way more ready. Plus, she wasn't separated from her father for her whole life. She was separated more recently. So she had a little more openness to the father-daughter relationship than Emma did at first. And they aren't the same age exactly, which makes it less weird.
Yeah. I think that feedback, that letter that you shared from, was it Evil Regal?
Yeah.
I think it's really, like, we had asked for that as well, and we have some feedback to share about just how our lives have changed since the show started and what's different for us. And I think that that is a really good way to kind of shift and start sharing some of those feedback stories, because, you know, our lives personally have changed a lot, and the show impacted people in so many different ways. I loved reading these stories. This was my favorite part of reading the feedback, was people who shared these, you know, personal stories of how their lives have changed because of once or throughout this time, or just how the show's impacted them. So, oh, I forgot.
Oh, I see.
And we have somebody else who's going to pop on with us to help us share this section.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Hunter, that's your cue.
Okay, I'm having my problems here. I am trying. So yes, it sounds funny right now, but I can tell you my recording sounds great.
Okay, good.
Okay. You don't sound too bad, to be honest.
Okay. I'm sitting here clicking. Unmute. It's not working.
That's fantastic.
Sorry, John.
I'll say that part again and you can jump on, okay?
Okay.
So we do have somebody coming on to the podcast a little bit late to join us for this section. And
Hello, everybody.
It's Hunter.
yay, it's
Yay.
Hunter Hathaway.
I made it.
The realm jumping is virtually complete. There's the spoilers and the main review all united. It's like Storybrooke.
We haven't done this in a long time.
No, we haven't.
No. And
My life is too crazy that I can't do anything live anymore.
Do you want to start, Hunter, and share how your life has changed and any way the show's impacted you, and then
yeah, sure.
Feedback?
No. My life has changed a lot since the show started. So I started listening to the podcast right from the beginning, and I was so excited when any feedback I put in was actually like used in the episodes, and they would say my name, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. But then I heard Daniel ask if he made a comment, something about saying they were looking for someone to do spoilers, and hello, that's my life. I'm always online. Nothing can be spoiled for me. So I did my little audition piece sitting in my car, recording on my phone. and then he picked me. I'm like, yay. So let's see. I've been with since season 2. And since that time, personally, I've gotten married. I've moved 3 times and I've had a baby.
Yay.
So my life has been pretty crazy since then. So, but yeah.
Among different time zones, I might add.
I did, from Maryland to California, and now I'm back in Florida. And it does not mean it. It's so funny because, like, I remember one time I was podcasting on the phone because I had to be live. I was podcasting live on the phone, driving down the highway and losing signals. Back in the old day.
Right.
I think I was like going to plan my wedding or something like that. And I'm like, we were driving overnight and I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't keep the damn phone. I can't keep service on this thing. Because of course, whenever we needed to talk, I was outside of a major city. But yeah, so This show has been my life for 6 years now, and it's just been a little crazy. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm sorry. I'm married to a sailor. I'm around sailors all the time. What do you expect?
It kind of sounded like she cut out, so maybe she
Right.
didn't say that.
I was.
Or as I like to say, sorry, John. Anyway, sorry.
Fantastic.
But yeah, so that's just me personally. A lot's happened. I'm sorry. Are we going on? Did you want me to read this?
Yes, please.
That's all right. I marked it. Don't worry. It won't be-
John!
Oh, goodness.
That's fantastic.
I'm overwhelmed.
This is why our
Editor
spoilers
happens.
have to be pre-recorded and no one can hear them.
My face hurts from laughing so much tonight.
Okay, but anyway, let's go on here. We did get an awesome story from Gareth. And he said, I started watching once in the summer between season 1 and 2. I binge watched the first season, and if memory serves, discovered the podcast while eagerly awaiting season 2. Listening to podcasts was a fairly new experience for me at the time. There were only a couple others. Oh, crap.
Sorry, John.
Chat, dude.
How do you expect me to get through this stuff? Come on, guys.
And you think this podcast just goes swimmingly, don't you?
I mean, come on, you've seen our edits. I lost power in the middle of one like 2 weeks ago.
No, the best is when you were taken over by the cyborg, and all I heard from you was beep rah, 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 for like an hour. And
Oh. Anyway, okay, sorry. Compose myself. And listening to podcasts was a fairly new experience for me at the time. There were only a couple others that I had picked up. This was the first podcast I ever sent feedback to, and I was surprised and delighted when my feedback was actually included in the show. Yep, that's me too. I really never expected it would be. Having my feedback included alongside other listeners made the podcast feel more like a community I was participating in than entertainment I was merely consuming. Participating in the podcast made watching the show more enjoyable and helped me stay engaged during some of the rough patches across the series. There was something warm and comforting in listening to the podcast. It felt like catching up with old friends, even though most of us have never met. Thank you all for many wonderful years of podcasting. Oh, you're welcome. I had fun doing it.
Ditto.
So can I tell you how my life has changed since this has all started?
Please do.
So I don't know if anybody knows this, but this show was the first show that was ever a client of mine. You guys are my first client.
Oh,
And the reason that I was hired was because Aaron would type on the keyboard so hard that it needed to be.
I wasn't typing hard. I just had a PC, okay?
It needed to be cut out, and Daniel was sick of doing it, so he was hiring somebody. And that started my love affair with Once, that I've only seen the pilot episode for. I've never watched the show, but I know all the characters. Although there was just one that I thought was a guy, and I found out it was a girl later on in the end of the show. I forget her name. But anyhow, this show has made me a first-class editor because I would wake up in the morning and I would go and I would look at the files, and there would be 5 people that talked for 2 hours, most of the time over each other. And it all had to sound seamless.
You did an awesome job.
Oh, well, thank you.
Absolutely.
But you
So
guys,
technically,
Go ahead.
Technically, Once Upon a Time in Wonderland was your first client.
That's it,
because
yes.
that's where
And-
I started.
But then I moved over to the main show, and it's been you guys have been like family to me. And I know I joke, and it's funny because there's nothing like I see when it's coming. I can almost see. I see something because you can see it in the wave, kind of like the Matrix when they watch. I can see it coming, and I go, "Oh, here comes a sorry John."
I can tell you our spoilers. If you ever listen to the raw footage, half of it is sorry, John. Sorry, John.
The best
Sorry,
one
John.
was when Bella was barking and the baby was crying, and it never finished either one of them. They just kept going on, and I'm like, don't they hear that? And I tattled on all of you to Daniel.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. You guys have been fantastic. The show has been a great show, and you have all been warriors for this show, and it really shows in the product. And I'm just glad to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Hashtag thank you, John. Oh, that's great. Yes, we could not do this show without John.
No, we
Even a
couldn't.
little bit.
Or rather, we could do a show that you probably wouldn't listen to without John.
Yes. Jeremy, do you want to go next?
Sure. So,
There's the sigh.
so I'm also known for size.
Mhm.
Apparently. That's fantastic. Yeah. How? So life has changed a lot. I mean, for anybody, I suppose it changes a lot in 7 years. I've only moved once, Hunter, so I don't. And it was, I mean, practically the same. Not the same county, but very nearby. So I just moved a little closer to work. But I've had 2 different jobs since the show started. I was quasi self-employed when it started, which may be part of the reason that I thought this would be such a great idea. I'm very glad we did it. Things change when your schedule changes, and meeting the demands of schedules along with the demands of the podcast, especially when the show changes nights, has been interesting. But
Hear.
yeah, I was thinking back to 7 years ago. I have 3 nieces and a nephew, and 2 of them were not born when this show started. And family has moved in different ways, and yeah, grandparents have moved on, and a lot of friendships have formed, and it's odd trying to quantify 7 years of your life. But it's interesting. The show pointed out early on that we use stories to help us make sense of our lives. And I think this show, in a lot of ways, has helped us see over and over again that we all think we're chasing a happy ending, but in this life, that may not be exactly what things look like. But the good things are what we find along the way, and it's never going to be all good, and it's never going to be good permanently. But whatever bad comes, we can get through it. The message of hope has been central, and it's something that everybody needs. And so from that standpoint, I think the show's just been very, as much as we talk about consistency and plots and things like that, the characters are what have always stood out to us. And a lot of the messages, despite being a bit mixed sometimes, the central messages have been really encouraging at times. And I'm sure that others would see that in some ways even more than I have. And we have a letter from Michael R. And he says, "Longtime listener, but first time writer here. I started watching once the day it premiered when I was 10 years old. It was the first serialized show made for adults I had ever watched on a week-to-week basis, and it completely blew me away. I'm 17 now, getting ready to graduate high school, and Once has been with me through it all. I've been listening to your podcast since season 4, but I've gone back and listened to every episode from the beginning. I wanted to thank you all for devoting so much time and thought into a show that was not always easy to love, and say that all your effort was much appreciated. You guys have made the show immensely more enjoyable during these last few rocky seasons. Once has certainly had its ups and downs, but I'm forever grateful for all of the joy and hope it's brought me throughout these last 7 years." Thank you, Michael.
I think I have birds outside my window.
I did write that in chat. I was like,
Would they like to go next?
Where's Bella tonight?
Bella is downstairs, hopefully sound asleep. She only likes to bark when we're doing our spoilers, apparently.
Oh, and the garbage trucks. There's no garbage trucks today.
There's no garbage truck. I can go next, though, if that's...
yes, please.
Okay. So, life has changed, obviously, for all of us. For me, I was in a completely different city, finishing up my master's degree when Once Upon a Time premiered. I used to watch it on my laptop, illegally, because I didn't have cable, and I can remember being in the live chat at Noodle and having to ask people, please tell me when it begins again, so that, because I would pause it during commercials so I could talk to everybody. It's someone just said it's hard to quantify really 7 years of your life, like this, but I've graduated my master's. I moved to a different city, had a couple different jobs, and for me, Once Upon a Time is an everyday thing. It's not something I think about just when I'm doing spoilers or joining you guys here. It's an everyday thing for me. And Daniel used to joke that he would trip over my dirty laundry at the forums because I never left. He'd pop on at like 6 o'clock in the morning to do maintenance, and I'm sitting there editing something and talking to someone in chat, and it's like, did you sleep? No, I'm good. It's fine. And I think for me, the biggest change are the people I've met. It's no secret that, when Neil died, it kind of really devastated me. But there was a group of people who all came together at the forums in the Swanfire thread, and we got each other through that, to the point where we started talking outside of the forums, and they know who they are. And I talk to them every single day. And we have met in real life. And last summer, several of us went to Disney World together. And they are...
You didn't tell me.
Yeah, it's true. I didn't tell you, and I didn't tell Matt, and you guys were both there at the same time, apparently.
Okay.
Sorry. But they are some of my very best friends, and I wouldn't have them, and we wouldn't have our friendship without this crazy little show that I often complain about. So, I'm always going to be very, very grateful for them. And we got some listener feedback from Melanie. And she says, "One thing I'll always be grateful that Once gave me is that it gave me something to talk about with one of my aunts. I wasn't particularly close with this aunt, but when we discovered that we both liked Once Upon a Time, It gave us something to talk about at family gatherings, and it gave me something to text to her about the show. She used to live near my work, and we went out to lunch a few times. Without once, I'm not sure we would have developed the relationship we did. And yeah, I completely get that, because there is a group of girls that are probably messaging me right now on Twitter asking if I'm okay. And I love them very, very much.
I loved that feedback. I love that you connected with people, like that people connected with other people that they otherwise would never have met through the show. And I sort of have that same experience. Like, obviously, like everyone said, a lot has changed in 7 years. I've only been on the podcast for 5. When the show began, I was also finishing my master's degree. I didn't even know that, Jacqueline. So I was finishing my master's degree and working as a nanny, and just I was in a very different place than I am now. The show also, like, a big part of the show for me for a few years was the Ugly Ducklings, which was this website that another fan and I created, that was kind of dedicated to the idea of the Ugly Duckling story, which was kind of Jennifer Morrison's, that's kind of what she attributed Emma to being, like the ugly duckling that's trying to kind of grow into a swan. And through that, we were able to share a ton of stories of people that just had all these struggles in their lives that were kind of waiting for that happy ending or that transformation, and kind of just the message that life is what you're becoming, and that you just kind of sometimes have to go through the muck to find whatever the good. And yeah, since I haven't moved, so maybe I'm the only one, I think, that hasn't moved. I haven't moved, but I have graduated and started, like, adulting, which is probably why there were so many changes to our podcasting sort of setup and schedule. Because as Jeremy says, it's a good idea when you're not working, but once you're working, you have to balance a lot more things. I also have a nephew that I did not have when one started, and recently a niece. And I also got certified to be a yoga teacher in these 7 years. So that was probably when I was the least present for this podcast, to be totally honest. That was a very difficult balancing act, but definitely worth it to have been able to continue. It was kind of a Dr. Seuss reference, but remember that life's a great balancing act. So yeah, there was great. I loved these personal stories that we got, and I was excited to hear everyone's. We got feedback from Megan, who says, "Hi there. I thought I would chime in on how Once Upon a Time has affected my life in these past 7 years. Once Upon a Time began when I was 11. Fun fact, Jared Gilmore is 2 weeks older than me, so it felt at times like I was growing up with Henry. On the episode when Henry had his first date with Violet, I had recently just gone on my first date, which is awesome. I stopped watching the show around season 6, but came back for the musical episode as well as the finale. There were parts of the finale that didn't make much sense to me, but I also cried intensely when Snow and Charming and Emma made their entrances. Like you guys, I was fairly critical of the show in later seasons, but I think all it took was taking those characters away for me to realize how much I missed them. Cue Felix's line about how things we haven't thought about in years still have the ability to make us cry. And I guess that means they did something really, really right, which is not something I had thought of, but is very true.
Right.
Anyways, you guys, thank you for your fantastic rant fests. I always hoped I could run into one of you in Steveston during filming so I could thank you in person for all the last realizations and squidding. Farewell for now, dearies."
Thanks, Megan. We would have loved to run into you in Steveston or run into Steveston. I've never been.
One thing I thought that was really interesting when I visited Steveston is none of the people that were there who were these humongous Once Upon a Time fans, none of them listened to the podcast. And I was like, all right, well, oncepodcast.com, guys. I think some of them have started listening since, but we also got feedback from DeAndre in the nick of time. And I do mean the nick of time. He knows that he knows that we run on once standard time as opposed to Eastern Standard Time. And he says, this show for the past 7 years has changed me tremendously. In the times I felt I was being pulled in many different directions to be something for everyone else but myself, to when people I was around who could only... Okay, sorry, give me 1 minute. Sorry. This show has... Okay, sorry. Why did I give myself so much reading?
I thought maybe you were crying, so you know.
I'm not sure.
Could be worse. I could be reading it.
Okay. So DeAndre wrote, this show for the past 7 years has changed me tremendously. In the times I felt I was being pulled in many different directions to be something for everyone else but myself, to when I was around people who could only see me for my past and not who I am today. This show helped me to find solace and healing in those areas of inadequacy, hurt, pain, and loneliness, and also sparked a new level of creativity for me. And as for the podcast, I found it when I felt really alone in my love for Once Upon a Time, and I found others who were as obsessed with the show as I was. Thank you, Daniel, Jeremy, Aaron, Jacqueline, Hunter, and everyone else who has worked on the podcast, and all those who work so hard on the website and forums. This has been an amazing ride. It's sad that it has to end, but all good things must come to a close. But I'm sure the story isn't ending. There will be more, and the stories that have been told in these characters will live on forever. So until next time, this isn't an ending. I hate endings because the story's done, and everyone here, well, their story is far from over. I refuse to believe there won't be more adventures, more love, more family, and yes, there will be more loss because that's just a part of life. And in the end, we can get past it with hope. Love you all, and God bless. Let's just end the podcast right there.
Right. And thank you, DeAndre. Your letters have always been amazing in their detail and passion, and you have some great theories, and we've appreciated having you and everyone who's written so faithfully be a part of the podcast.
Okay. So some last bit of feedback that we got that was more of a question that I think we should talk about was from Heather T. And she says, I really love the Once podcast and the incredible work that Daniel and all the co-hosts, past and present, have brought to the show over the years. I am more sad about the impending end of the podcast than I am about the series ending. Having listened over the years and enjoyed getting to know the hosts through discussions and banter, I have often wondered how everyone came together to form the podcast team.
Sorry, I'm late. or should I have been a little bit more happier? Like, sorry, I'm late. well. Sorry, that's actually Gallivant.
That's a different show we reviewed.
Which I do miss, by the way. Yeah. I love the songs from that show. Sorry.
We just got caught doing an unsupervised podcast.
Surprise, it's been happening for months.
You guys have been doing a great job with the podcast, really, and hearing some of the unedited versions and the edited versions. John's been doing a great job, too, in making you guys sound great, and fantastic bloopers, which will be released at some point to all of our supporters. So anyone who's ever given money to the podcast will, as long as I have an up-to-date email address, they'll receive the bloopers from that.
Blooper reel.
Oh my gosh, I can just imagine. There's a lot of sorry Johns in it, aren't there?
There's
Yeah.
going to be
Some of
just...
them are doozies.
Yeah.
And I bet most of them are from me.
It's just every time there's an ice cream truck or a trash can, or we all just like, oh wait.
One
What
time
are
I
we
think I had the Blue
doing?
Angels flying over me because I live right by Miramar, and I was just like, "What's that? Oh wait, air show this weekend."
One time a tornado siren went off in the middle.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
How
Oh,
many
the
tries?
Amber Alert. Do you remember that one? Was just like a couple weeks ago. The Amber
Oh,
Alert went off,
yeah.
and I had
It
like
was
5
so
devices making noises.
So, how did our podcast come to be? I want to give some little history, and you guys can jump in with some of your bits of the story too. Jeremy and I had watched Lost years ago, and it took me several seasons to even get interested in Lost because I hated this little thing I was introduced to in Lost called flashbacks.
I never understood that.
And I made fun of that so much in Lost. But by the time Lost was over, I began to appreciate the flashbacks a little more and appreciate the storytelling techniques and the depth of it. And Jeremy and I were listening to TV show fan podcasts about Lost. And there was some point where we thought, hey, you know what would be cool? I'm not sure if it was his idea or it was my idea, but we thought that it could be cool to make a rewatching Lost podcast. I even registered certain relevant domains for it. And our idea was it would be Jeremy and I who have already watched Lost with someone else who's watching Lost for the first time. So the first half of the discussion would be with that third and maybe even a fourth person who are seeing it for the first time. And then the second half of the discussion would be where we would pretty much make fun of what they said and how wrong some of those theories were and how we could review that, now that we've watched the entire series, how different things look rewatching Lost like that. But just when we were about to pull things together for that, Jeremy said to me, there's this other TV show that's coming out that's by some of the same guys who worked on Lost. And I thought, okay, I'll check it out. I think it actually just started at that point.
Yeah.
So I watched a couple episodes on Hulu, or maybe I did it illegally too. I don't remember how I acquired those episodes. But I watched the pilot episode and I thought, oh yeah, this is good. This looks like this will be a lot of fun. Let's do a podcast about this. So very quickly, we pulled things together to get the podcast started, and Jeremy was the one who suggested it, and Jeremy and I have already podcasted before, and so we had this good dynamic. We knew how TV show fan podcasts can work, so it made sense that he and I would do it together. And we also had a friend, Dan Flynn, who was also starting to watch the show, and I remember him saying at one point to me, yeah, if you ever need some help with the podcast, like on the blog or anything like that, let me know. Well, I roped him in to be a co-host too, which at some point he said, when I offered my help, I didn't really mean being a co-host every week.
That was so funny.
And then my wife Jenny was also watching the show with me and said, oh yeah, this looks like it'll be a lot of fun. And I remember that moment. It was kind of like a moment of betrayal. They talk about Netflix cheating, where we were recording the podcast. I wanted to launch with a few episodes already published. So I think we launched right around the time the episode 6 or 7 published or aired on TV. And so we were watching an episode. We'd record a podcast, watch an episode, record a podcast like that. So we were still going through without having been spoiled. And at one point, Jenny revealed to us that, oh, she had already watched the next 5 episodes. It's like, what? I feel so cheated on. And but she brought a lot to the podcast, a lot of fun too, and so it was the 4 of us for that first year, and we even got a photo shoot that if you've seen my social profile anywhere, I use the exact same photo everywhere for every social account. That photo is from a photo shoot that the 4 of us did, Jeremy, Dan, Jenny, and I did in the Cincinnati area. And I don't think we ever used those photos because that summer,
Right.
Dan said, I'm not going to be able to keep doing the podcast. I'm kind of losing interest in the show or something like that. And it was a rough summer too because I wanted to keep a consistent podcast schedule through the summer. So we really stretched some things.
Yup.
And then, yeah. So some co-hosts started to drop off. Hunter mentioned when she came on, and that was a big help because I wanted to remain pure the whole time and not be spoiled. Because I'd hear these other TV show fan podcasts where they'd talk about a theory, but they had that theory because they were spoiled. So it's like, well, that's not a theory anymore if you know that's what's going to happen.
Right.
And what if I don't want to be spoiled? I don't want to hear your theories based on spoilers. So that's when I knew I wanted to have spoilers at the end, but I didn't want to be the one to do them because that just meant I'd have to be spoiled in some way, and I couldn't keep up with all of that. And Hunter did a fantastic job. She might have been the only one to apply for the position.
I think you told me it was between me and one other person.
Okay.
But you were waiting for our demo reels at the time, and then and then you said, "Hey, you got it," and then you played that one on the air.
Yeah, I think it was you had a good knack for communicating and a personality that sounded like it fit great in the podcast.
All I remember is I was sitting at work, writing it out, doing research on my little teeny tiny iPhone, and sitting in the car recording it. And that is what I sent to you.
And then sometime, I can't remember exact timelines of these things, but when Rumple's girl popped into the scene and Jacqueline was in the forums so much, and the forums were getting so active, and I couldn't be a moderator of these things because I was either still working at a full-time job or I just launched into my business full-time. Or no, that's right. The podcast came after I'd been full-time into my business. So I was running out of time to work on the forums. And here's a little tip. If you ever are looking for a community moderator, look for the person who is the most active in the group, not a troll. Jacqueline was not a troll in the group, but look for the person who's the most active and is not a troll. They're your next moderator.
Alternate episode title.
That
Jacqueline was not a troll.
that was fairly early on in season 2 when you kind of put out feelers for mods, and Matt and I decided to take up that mantle. And then the very first podcast I ever did with you was because everybody abandoned you for episode 219, Lacey. And you messaged me and you said, "Can you come talk about this episode?" And I did it through Skype with no microphone because I was still at school at the time. So it was just on my Skype and computer microphone, built-in microphone. And I actually think I asked you to refer to me as Rumple's girl because I was like, nobody else knows me except by that.
Like, no stalkers.
Yeah, and Matthew Paul stepped up too because he was also just as active in the forum. So I met with you guys on a GoToMeeting call and showed you how to work with the moderation in the forums. And we were using different forum software back then too.
Yeah.
And boy, when we switched forum software, that was quite an ordeal. And even Dachshund stepped up to volunteer to help us with that migration a bit, and a bunch of others too. John Buchanan becoming our editor. During the Once Upon a Time in Wonderland time, Jenny and I did a spin-off podcast for the spin-off TV show for a spin-off other podcast network called TV Talk. And it was a brilliant idea where these were podcasts that were about 10 to 15 minutes that were supposed to be recorded almost right after the show aired, and it would be on dozens of TV shows, and you could download them all through this one central app. The network, I think, had some great approaches to it, also some not so great approaches because that network is gone now. Mm-hmm. But Jenny and I hosted the TV Talk show for Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, and this network had hired different audio editors to produce the shows, and John Buchanan was our audio editor for that little short form podcast. And so I got some experience working with him there and sending him the audio, and he'd let me know certain things like, wow, you're easier to work with because the way you record and these little things that you do make it so much easier to work on these things and such. I thought, well, that's cool. And then TV Talk came to a close at some point, and I think it was during those Wonderland years, though, or we could call them the Wonder Years. Ooh, that'd be a great name for a TV show. Yeah, the editing was starting to get really complicated. And I just didn't have the time for it. And what would end up happening with the editing is in the first half of the episode or so, I would be really tight with the editing. And there were even moments where I think I offended some of the co-hosts like Dan or Jeremy or Jenny or others, because we'd go on some little tangent and they'd see me reach for the mark button to mark that this is going to get edited out.
Yeah, you had a big timer on the screen, and we had to fit our discussion within that time. We had very uniform episodes.
I forgot that.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, it's because one of our listeners, Noni, would burn our episodes. No, she would burn them to audio CD. And audio CDs can only hold a certain number of minutes. So I was thinking, okay, I want to make sure our episodes aren't any longer than could fit on an audio CD. And at some point, then I think I just offered to Noni, hey, how about I just split the episodes for you instead of these limits? But yeah, sometimes that timer would go off during a recording of the episode, and I wouldn't freak out, but Dan often was the one who would react the most, Dan or Jeremy. But so editing was becoming really tough, and halfway through the episodes, I would end up just kind of like, forget it. I'll let all of these mistakes. So the second half of the episode would be like worse than the first half of our podcast episodes, because I just give up.
I don't know if I knew that.
And so I started looking for, could I hire an editor? Could I afford to hire an editor? It's taking me so much time to edit the episodes that I'm not able to do more profitable stuff in my business. So I was putting out some feelers thinking maybe I could only afford to hire someone from the Philippines or something like that. This is my budget. And John Buchanan popped in and was like, hey, hire me. I'm in the US and I'd love to work with you. I think I even said something to him like, thanks, but I probably can't afford you. I can only afford Filipino rates maybe or something. And he really wanted to learn more about editing and wanted to work with me more, because I think he had been following me through my podcast about podcasting. So I hired him to do it. We worked out an agreement, cost and everything. And it was such a huge relief to no longer be editing the episodes. Another big relief was hiring Jack to write our show notes, because I wanted these really thorough show notes that would be great for search engine optimization, because after all, that's how Jacqueline found us, is through this thing called SEO and thorough show notes and forums with all of these discussions and keywords and stuff. And Jeremy had written some show notes sometimes. Jenny had, I think Dan had once or twice. We had a couple other show notes writers, Winnie, Corbin.
I did some too.
Oh yeah, Aaron did too. And it was just one of those things where like the episode might be finished editing, but there were no show notes. I think actually there are still some of our early episodes that still say show notes coming soon.
Oh no.
Well, yeah, 7 years later, we might actually finish those show notes.
Ooh, I want to do that. But with a future perspective.
So I tweeted out something about looking for a writer, and that's when Jack from the Philippines responded saying, I listened to you guys. I love Once Upon a Time. I'd love to work with you guys. And I think I did a trial with her and really liked that she wrote the show notes in the way I wanted them written, the format. She could put in the screenshots and different things for us too. And her role has grown over the years too. Mm-hmm. And it was another huge relief to not have to worry about writing show notes. And she could listen live and write the show notes while we were recording, so that since John is such a miracle worker with podcast editing, 5 minutes after we finish recording, our episode would be completely edited. Ha ha. Myth in podcasting, by the way. And but then the information could all be there, so it'd be very quick and easy to publish the episodes. And that was a lot of fun to pass that off. And so it was around that time with the Wonderland podcast that we did that Aaron came on board, and we'd posted in the forums, I think maybe mentioned in the podcast, hey, we're going to do this spinoff. Anyone interested in joining us, especially if you have a particular interest in Alice in Wonderland? And Aaron had already sent in some feedback to our podcast, our comedy podcast as well. And she, I think she was like one of the only people we knew who had read the book. So it was like, hey, you read the book. You're an expert. Join us.
And if I can just say, I believe the tweet was saying anyone who might want to be, I took it as involved in some way in the podcast. I had no idea that I was going to be asked to be a co-host with
This
you.
is starting to become a pattern.
And it was kind of amazing because you were like, yeah, I think you sent like a questionnaire of some kind just to make sure that that I was aware of the network and all of that stuff. But I was just like thinking, oh, I'll help with the show notes or feedback or something. It was amazing.
And so then when Once Upon a Time in Wonderland ended and our spinoff ended there, our dynamic with Aaron, I thought, was really good. So when schedules started shifting around and things with Once Upon a Time and our own personal schedules, I thought, well, Aaron already has a microphone because she was on with us in Wonderland podcast. So maybe she could join us for Once Upon a Time proper. I think she filled in a couple times here and there as well. And I thought this works really well. And so she joined us and was a great member of the team. And then Heather Ordover, who joined us for that one season, as well as when Jacqueline was joining us, they were both, well, Jacqueline was an expert during the Greek mythology season, and that was great to have her insight into that. Something she probably never expected, that her insight into Greek mythology would play a helpful role in the podcast. Did you ever expect that, Jacqueline?
No. I mean, I think we always thought that Hercules might enter just because he was, property of Disney, but no, I never thought that I'd have to dredge up some old school notes here and there to come talk about a fairy tale show.
Yeah, and that brought great depth and expertise because Jacqueline was like, oh yeah, this comes from such and such mythology. And I'm just thinking, I can't even pronounce that word, let alone know its history. And wow. And then Heather coming in. Heather sent us some emails and was talking about, or no, actually what it was is Melanie Quinn, one of our listeners, sent us an email introducing us to Heather, because Heather in her podcast Craft Lit had been talking about Gulliver's Travels, and there were certain crossovers with Once Upon a Time, and she had been watching Once Upon a Time as well. So when the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde characters were coming in, or we knew that they would be coming, then Melanie emailed both Heather and myself and said, maybe you guys might have some kind of crossover here, since Heather's an expert with the Jekyll and Hyde things, since she just went through the book. Again, you read the book, you're an expert, apparently. And the person who writes the book is apparently like a deity. But Heather had this unique perspective. She was an experienced podcaster. And so we connected, and at some point I just said, hey, Heather, actually, I'm looking at the email right now. I said, how much of a, quote, expert, unquote, would you say you are on Jekyll and Hyde? Have you been watching Once Upon a Time? I tend to ask these questions, like loaded questions, without letting people know. And Heather was already familiar with me because of my own podcast about podcasting, and she's a customer of one of the products I created. And she said, I've loved Once Upon a Time and watched it consistently with my sons up through episode 10 of the last season. Then life intervened, but I'm so excited to hear that Hyde is going to be part of Once Upon a Time. And conversation went from there, and I just asked, hey, would you be interested in joining us for an episode? And she joined us, I thought, and that was her trial. She didn't know it, but she joined us and did great, brought great perspective, great conversation, a good dynamic. And then I asked her, would you like to be a co-host for this season? Because you've got some great insight into these things. And she'd even already worked with John Buchanan, that he had edited some of her stuff too. And so she joined us for a season and provided some great insight too. And then through the history of the podcast, we've had other people come and go, filling different roles, doing some guest posts on the blog, some technical things for us. Keb doing our masterminding our timeline. That's my thing. Earlier, you guys were talking about, what's Jeremy going to think about this? What's Aaron going to think? What's Jacqueline going to think? I think my pet peeve was the timeline. But it was just starting to get so complicated that I could not maintain it all that much. And at some point, I saw Keb share a Google spreadsheet she had of a timeline, or maybe she'd sent it to us as, hey, here's this little thing I'm doing. It's like, hey, you're the nerd. Hashtag hire the nerd. Hey, Keb, would you like to do our timeline for us? And we had some other help for the timeline as well, but Keb really put in so much work into that. And through the years, or I could even say through the millennia, since that's what it is. A timeline.
I still have problems with that timeline up until that very last episode.
Yeah, well,
I think we all do.
There's still questions about the timeline, but they will always be forever unanswered or just merged somehow. So that's how all of us came to be. I don't think I left anyone out there.
Well, that's how we came to be on the podcast.
And 1,000 years later, we're going to be doing this all over again.
Great.
For the Once Upon a Time reboot.
Not my once. I love how when I started recording, I was like very timid and I was afraid of talking and interrupting. And there were all these like awkward pauses. And I was sick a lot because it was the winter. And now Jeremy and I just jinxed the exact same line.
Yeah.
I remember when Daniel sent me this mic stand that I have now had in my little office for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. I'm pretty sure it takes a rocket scientist to put this thing together.
It does. It definitely does.
It took me 2 hours, and I was tweeting the entire time I was doing it, sending out photos like, is this right? And I finally had to message him and just went, you need to get on Skype right now and walk me through this because none of this makes sense.
And it still falls and stuff.
It still falls. I still hit it many, many times.
It's because you talk with your hands.
I do.
Well, we actually, for a while, in the first podcast studio that we had, or no, second one, when I had some nicer mic stands, kind of like the arm mic stands, there was a balancing problem, and the mic kept gradually shifting one way or another. So it would gradually shift into someone's face, or they would gradually have to start leaning forward to try and stay close to the microphone. And I ended up using folded coupons for feminine hygiene products. They were coupons for it, not the actual products. It worked out to balance the microphone that I put those in the stand.
I will try to find a picture of some of the podcast recording setups that I've had because I've traveled for work for so long and we podcasted rain or shine, like whether I was in a hotel room in Thunder Bay or whatever. And I had some very interesting mic stands, like stacked books, I don't even know, hotel pillows, like so many different things. Sometimes I would have my computer stacked up on books so that it was at the right level, like very creative. Anything for the podcast.
Podcasters do.
The show must go on.
Exactly.
Do.
Aaron, do you want to take back over?
Sure. I wasn't sure how that was going to work. So I was just letting you do that if you wanted to.
Papa Daniel enters the room and we're all like, okay, we don't speak until he does.
I'm just here to make everyone cry.
Is that going to happen? No, I'm just kidding. So some of us have shared, as we were sharing your favorite moments, we shared our favorite moments when they coincided, but we also wanted to just talk about whatever, our highlights of the show, favorite moments. I've got like a most tragic death highlight in mind, and just kind of the things that we want to talk about as it pertains to the show. And I did assert that most people's would be in season 1 and 2. I've already been proven wrong, so let's just go from there. Daniel, what were some of your favorite moments from the show?
The musical, I think, was definitely one of my favorites.
Yes.
And one of those things that they could only, I think, properly execute years into the TV show, where for me, I felt like these are characters that I love. So seeing them sing and dance was a whole lot of fun. It didn't feel so bad. And I think it fit the show well. And it was a great way to end the show, too.
Yeah.
It was a great series finale.
Yeah, it was.
Apparently, Jennifer Goodwin hates musicals and was so like begrudging that she had to do that. Heard that in an interview.
I seem to remember when they were doing like a behind the scenes sort of featurette before the episode aired, like nobody was allowed to look at her when she was singing.
No, I remember that too. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think we talked about it on one of our spoiler podcasts that nobody was allowed to look at Jennifer Goodwin while she was singing because she was so nervous.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would be if I had to
Yeah.
do that.
Me too.
And you know, while I'm on the subject of series finales, the other favorite thing of mine was the first time that Once Upon a Time ended. Back in
Season 1?
back in season 3A, at the end of that with the Peter Pan thing. So kind of like Matthew R. and Jeremy were talking about, I thought that was a beautiful ending to Once Upon a Time, even though we all knew it wasn't going to end then. It was a beautiful ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that whole story arc, too. The Peter Pan story arc, I think still was my favorite.
I liked that story arc, but I'm still a little disappointed that they kind of ruined what they were going to do in season 2 to make that story
Yeah.
arc happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually on my least favorites list, so yeah, no payoff for season 2 and what we thought was going to happen.
Jeremy, what was one of your favorite things?
A lot of my favorites I may have said before, tended to be Snow and Regina scenes. So in Apple Red as Blood, when we see the Once Upon a Time version of what's really an iconic moment of the evil queen getting Snow to eat the apple. But Snow did it knowing what she was doing. And their dynamic and the framing of the scene and everything was just wonderful. And then I don't even know if I would say parallel, but similarly, when Snow in Storybrooke asked Regina to take her heart and crush it, after all, the way they played that scene and sort of at some moments both of them talking at the same time, it was just really a well done moment.
I really loved their development, kind of as we talked about earlier, just as characters.
Right.
Jacqueline?
My all-time favorite moment is the 3-minute conversation between Neil and Rumpel in Neil's apartment in Manhattan, where there's just so much raw pain and tragedy between those two characters, and Neil's line, "try abandonment," just wrecked me. To this day, I find it, I just like lose it whenever I watch that episode and that moment. And the dynamic between Bobby Carlyle and Michael Raymond James was just always so good. And that is my very favorite moment of the entire series.
Wow. That's awesome.
Man.
I can never pick favorites. Like superlatives. I can't do that.
Manhattan was one of mine as well, the whole episode, but in a different scene. But the "did you know who I was, where I was from the whole time? Was this some sort of sick, twisted plan?" When Emma really realizes like that her whole life has been everything she knew kind of crumbled in that moment. Good acting, good writing, good episode. Hunter, what was one of your favorite moments?
But it's so funny.
I don't know. Jeremy started it.
Classic Jeremy and Aaron. You reminded me of the Papa John slogan.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a pizza place.
Like better food, better ingredients. I don't know.
Oh.
Anyway, it's just in my brain. Don't worry about it.
I think I figured out where that quote from earlier tonight was from. Okay, anyway, continue. Sorry, Hunter.
It's okay. I really didn't have a favorite moment per se, but it's a bunch of different storylines or people that I feel we never got enough of. So, like, I miss Graham. I say that all the time whenever we're talking about someone coming back. I'm like, ooh, is Graham gonna come back? And Merida, because she's my favorite princess and I really loved her storyline. And then my favorite thing I think that draws me to the show the most is Snow and Charming and their quote, "I will always find you." And how no matter what, they always found each other through anything.
That's one of my favorites, but one of my least favorites, just to segue into this because it fits so well, is when Emma is on the boat going to the underworld and says to Hook, "I will find you. I will always find you." I was like, way to steal your parents' line.
Right?
Like, that is not your line. Get a new one.
Right. No, I loved it. I love the Snow and Charming storyline with that part because true love, yeah.
Because true love. Daniel, what was one of your least favorite moments?
Discovering the curse was not created by Hades during that whole underworld season. I was thinking, remember I mentioned this in the podcast that, it makes total sense that the underworld looks like Storybrooke because the curse was originally created by Hades to bring everyone to Hades. And that's why Storybrooke actually looks like Hades, not the other way around. But that wasn't the case. That's more of a least favorite that didn't happen, but a least favorite that did happen, unfortunately, many times, were the filler episodes. And some of them, gave us a little bit of character backstory, and some of them were just not good episodes.
Yeah. Although, funny enough, some of what we considered filler episodes from, say, season 1 sort of became semi-iconic later.
Dreamy.
Yeah. Dreamy, actually, once I somehow managed to see it like 4 times, I heard, like, Nova's monologue about love from the other room, and without having to see it, like how silly and cutesy they were, I was like, that was actually really good. But I was thinking of True North, because I felt like that was a filler episode at the time simply because Hansel and Gretel disappeared. But I mean, that brought us Gravy or Butter and The Blind Witch.
Gravy or butter?
I said that about 19 times at dinner last night. I was like, gravy or butter. And then I was like, I know nobody here gets it, but still. And then again, when we were cleaning up from dinner, because I had to like put the extra gravy into a container, and I was like, gravy or butter. So yeah, I mean, good writing.
You might be a oncer if you say lines that you know nobody else gets.
And say them anyway.
I was
Jeremy, do you have...
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was making a list of some of my least favorite episodes. And this kind of ties in with the filler, but I was really shocked that my least favorite episodes, my bottom 3, are not what you would consider filler. I think they're not about random characters that in the end are just kind of one-offs. Because I remember deeply disliking the episode True North when it aired, and I actually quite like it now in retrospect. Whereas, like, if I never ever watch Quiet Minds or the Swan Song ever again, I'm perfectly fine with that.
I don't have enough, like, this sounds terrible, but I don't have enough recollection of the specific episodes, despite watching them 2 or 3 times and doing a 1 to 2 hour long podcast about them.
I'm with you.
To even pick I have a least favorite moment, which was what I already shared. Anything that was the Dark One season and the time travel stuff. Those were my least favorite things, but yeah, I don't have, well, but I'm not the nerd that we're hiring for that reason, I guess. Jeremy, other than Squid Ink, The Burning Red Room, etc., or including those if those were on your list, what were some of your least favorites?
Yeah, Squid Ink is mainly, what it represents. Nobody is surprised to hear that I don't like retroactive continuity or lack of continuity, period. Retcon. Sometimes retcon would be a relief, like try, but and a lot of it is just echoed with other people. Time travel, I didn't like changing the season 1 history that we loved so much. So in my mind, it's still kind of not changed.
Yeah,
I don't think of that as different. And the Underworld arc, but even very specifically when I think back about the Underworld storyline, bringing Hook back when they didn't bring back others who I would have considered, if you can consider someone this more worthy, and the way they handled Neil in that season, and Mila's end, which was completely just hopeless and unresolved, much like what they then did to Robin in that same season, and all the sort of souls being destroyed and that kind of thing. And then, of course, the ultimate betrayal, ending the Dark One story, and then saying, just kidding. Because a vial of magic was at hand. So that whole thing, that's probably the low point for me.
I personally, I loved the Underworld stuff mainly because of Greg German, who played Hades, was so much fun to watch.
True.
And I really enjoyed his relationship with Zelina, which, I mean, for me, that's really shocking because Zelina is one of my least favorite characters. But they did this, I think, in more than just season 5B. It wasn't localized to just this one, where they would set up all of this story and then just cut it off of it at its knees and have some magical MacGuffin that just comes in, saves the day, because they're like, oh shoot, we have to set up the next season by introducing these new characters, this new realm, something that's going to get us to the next year. And like for the Olympic glowing rock to suddenly come out of nowhere, for Zeus to just appear and be like, oh, P.S., I can totally bring you back. No worries. So, yeah. The ending of the Underworld arc deeply bothered me, especially with Robin's death and just kind of the hopelessness that it represented. But I love Greg German. He was one of my favorite guest actors.
It was, for all its problems and really, I guess, the Dark One thing was actually preceding that. It was actually surprisingly watchable considering what I was expecting.
Yeah. And one of my very favorite moments comes from that season, and it's the Neil and Emma meeting in the bug at the very, very top of the 100th episode. The fact that the episode opens with that, and it's clear that, you know, for me, that she'll always love him. He'll always be a big part of her life. And, you know, I would have brought you back if I knew I could do this. And that moment, like, Michael Raymond James to me got shorthanded with his death. It wasn't a good way to go out. It wasn't, you know, good work for him. But that moment, that showcased to me just how powerful that story was, and I really loved it.
Yeah. Even in the Wish realm, he only got to be a painting.
This is true.
Hunter, what are some of your least favorite moments?
So, listening to you guys, I keep remembering, oh yeah, that happened.
Right.
Me too.
Because I'm like, wow, I forgot a lot of stuff. But I think one of the things that not really annoyed me, but bothered me throughout the entire show is that Rumple was connected to everyone. And they made it just like the littlest thing. And it was just like, well, how do we make this fit? Oh, he met them at this point at this time type thing. And let's show a flashback of it. Like, to me, I was just like, and how does this person fit in? Oh, they're related to Rumple. Like, to me, it just seemed like, I don't know, that just annoyed me a lot.
Oh, that's funny. I remember we had some early theories that Rumpelstiltskin was the thread that was marring all the stories we knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like I said, I can't really, off the top of my head, I can't think of one thing I hated the most, or I not really hated, but disliked the most. But that was just one of the things that has bugged me since episode 1.
That's funny.
One of the things that's bugged me throughout many of the seasons is the merely misunderstood villains. You know, where they're so evil, and at the end of their story arc, you discover that, oh no, they just wanted love, or they just wanted a sister, they just wanted a daughter, they just, you know, one of those things. It's like, oh, it's all okay now because they just wanted to be loved.
There are very few times that Once Upon a Time could ever truly surprise me, because I, you know, obviously live and breathe the spoilers. But what you just said brings up one time they genuinely shocked me, and that was the reveal that Cruella was basically a sociopath.
Right.
And that it wasn't that she wanted love or a mother or a daughter or anything else that they often put on these villains. It was that she was just straight up crazy.
Just desperation and gin.
Yeah. And it was so refreshing to finally have a villain who, yeah, was pretty much just born evil.
Or how about that they start a story and then they never finish it until the very last episode in the last 5 seconds of the show.
Like
Lily.
Henry being Rumple's undoing. Yeah, Lily as well. And the dragon. We finally learned who the dragon was. It's like, how many answers can we stuff into the series finale?
Yes. Because they knew that they'd be hearing about it for years to come, going, so whatever happened with the dragon?
It was one of the most passive-aggressive writing moves I have ever witnessed. When they just casually drop into conversation, oh, Zorro was Lily's father. After years of Hunter and I having to deal with that question in hot seats. Like,
Yes.
I was like, oh.
Do you guys know about what hot seats are?
I guess not.
No.
Okay, so what it would be is like, usually it was by EW, Entertainment Weekly. Yeah. They would sit down with Adam and Eddie, and they would ask them these questions. And we would get a maybe as the answer, or no, I don't think so. That's a good idea. Like, they won't come out and actually say an answer.
I would be very disappointed if we did not learn the answer to that question.
We would get so annoyed with them.
That's basically why I think why they stopped doing the official Once Upon a Time podcast. Just because that's what Estelle Magecki, I forget her last name, but
I think you're right.
Estelle would ask these great questions and get horrible answers back like that episode after episode.
But that's
after
what they
episode.
do. That we've been doing that since season 2. We've been getting those horrible answers on everything.
But
Is
what are
someone
they
going
do?
to die? Maybe.
Are they going to say, oh, yeah, it's going to be this and this and this? And, well, now you don't have to watch the show anymore. I mean, I understand.
Oh, no. I mean, I never expected them to come out and fully give, the answers to their long season plot away. Yeah. But you read enough of those things where there's, and don't get me wrong, this isn't bashing Adam and Eddie, but there's clearly like a line of passive aggressiveness where they do not want to have to answer this one particular question anymore because they straight up don't know. And I don't know if you guys ever heard about it, but they were going to do this standalone episode where they answered all the questions you ever had, like about Will and Anastasia. Because if you remember, Will came to Once Upon a Time proper, and apparently Anastasia either died or is missing, and we still don't know. They were going to answer about Lily and her father, all these things. They were going to compact them into one episode and just throw the answers at you.
I have one last crackpot theory, you guys.
Oh. I want to hear it.
The Will Scarlet that came to
Oh,
Storybrooke
I know where you're going with this.
was Wish Realm Scarlet.
Oh.
Except
Or
he came before the
will,
Wish
if
Realm
you
was
will.
created.
But don't forget that
Time travel.
whatever generation of curse it was
Right.
took people back in time. So
Yeah.
maybe he...
It was created with history.
Yeah, and this was all during the same time as I think the Cloverfield experiment might have been going on. And so the
Hey,
paradox...
no spoilers. I haven't seen that.
So the Will of season 4 was actually Wish Realm Will and Wish Realm Anastasia.
Yes.
So our Will and Anastasia are totes
fine.
living perfectly happy.
That's
Yeah, on Forgotten Character Island.
Shh. You know
Makes
what?
total sense.
I accept it. I accept it if it means that I don't have to try and rationalize where Anastasia is.
absolutely.
So the spinoff 1.0 was one of my favorite moments of the show, being Wonderland, being how I came to be on this podcast. And I think mostly it's the podcast connection that makes it my favorite, but there were some good moments.
Well, and you know what? That show never felt like, I don't remember it feeling like they were making it up as they went. Because
No.
they had a tight story they wanted for a 13-episode run, and they told it, and it was over.
I rewatched some of the scenes from that show last night while I was doing podcast prep. And it was like I rewatched the one like near the end where it's like this Will and Anastasia moment that I'm not going to spoil because I do think that there are people listening who have not watched that series.
Yeah.
And they need
But-
to.
Yeah, they need to. It was amazing.
I believe it's on the ABC app right now.
Oh.
But it was just heart-wrenching. And then Will and his little line, "My heart's caused me enough suffering. Nobody needs to die because of it, not even you." He didn't say it like that. I said it like that. But. And just that Wonderland theme, the nothing is impossible in Wonderland. And the Jabberwocky.
And the Jabberwocky.
Jabber, 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 jabber.
I deeply regret that they never found a way to bring the Jabberwocky over to Once Upon a Time proper. Because
Me
she
too.
was incredible.
I think I still dropped a line from her last week in the podcast. Like, such a good show. Daniel, what's another one of your favorites? I knew you were going to say that, so I was like mouthing it along with you.
Yeah, Cora, I think every time I saw her, especially when she showed up in Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, like a part of me cheered because here was a pure villain and a villain that was made, not born a psychopath, sociopath, psychotic, whatever. And she was connected to so many different things like Rumple, and seeing her in these different episodes definitely among the highlights. When I saw in the finale, when I saw Peter Pan there, I was started getting excited, thinking, "Oh, are we going to see Cora too? Cora, 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 Cora." But no.
I hope you listened to the podcast when we talked about Cora. It was one of our unsupervised podcasts, and I made sure that I said Cora. Cora actually appeared in my very favorite scene of the show, if we're talking in superlatives, which was Queen of Hearts. And this was mentioned earlier because somebody else wrote this was their favorite. But when she tried to pull out Emma's heart and then Emma did the Care Bear stare, and I believe I've highlighted this as my favorite moment probably for the last 5 years, since it probably aired about 5 years ago. And her, "Oh, you foolish girl, don't you know? Love is weakness." And then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stare. That was one of the scenes that I watched over and over and over again. And just my favorite character was Emma, and Cora was great. She was probably my favorite villain.
And that whole moment where she threw her staff into the ground, and instead of parting the Red Sea, she instead made that dome to protect them during the first curse. That was really cool to see the curse from that perspective. One of my favorite scenes.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to throw a couple of my favorites out there at the same time because I have way too many. One of the ones I've remembered, even as we've been talking, was I can't remember at this exact moment which episode it was. It was one of the first in season 1. It might have even been episode 3. After the first 1 or 2 episodes, there was the episode that kind of explained a little bit more about Snow, and we saw some of her banditry and things that she did.
Was it
But then-
Snowfalls?
Snowfalls episode
I was
1
Yeah.
and
I was
3.
gonna say Snow Falls,
Yep.
but I couldn't remember if that was that one or a later one. But we saw. Seems to me we saw her story. Then we later saw some things from Charming's perspective, and then at the end of the Charming story, it cuts to we see Snow in the tree, and we already know what she's going to do.
Yeah.
Because we had already seen that whole story, and that was part of what I loved about the show early on, how everything was very clearly planned out ahead because they could weave things together that way, in a way they could only do if they actually had that plan. And the other is, interestingly enough, another long conversation in Neil's apartment, which was Regina talking to Emma. And I remember talking about that at the time. They slowed down, and they spent far longer on actual character development than they normally stopped to do. And Regina talked about bearing the weight of the evil queen and about how she had changed. And that was something that just stood out for a long time.
Sorry, there's a motorcycle. I wanted to wait.
Was
Until
it
it
Cinderella?
I think it was Henry.
Okay.
Regina's entire story is probably one of my favorites. Backing off of what Jeremy just said.
Way to knock it down to a little thing.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah, pick something smaller, right? But I also just I think back over the past 7 years, and when the show first started, and I was at the forums for the very first time, basically ranting about how Regina was the true evil of the show, how this series would end with them having to defeat her because she was the most monstrous of them all. You know, while defending my beautiful, beautiful Rumpelstiltskin, mind you. And the fact that at the end of all this, I can say that her story was the biggest success, that she is the most changed, that in so many ways, Once Upon a Time is actually her story. Like, it's just so shocking to me that they managed to bring her so far.
Yeah.
Or she got exactly what she wanted.
Right.
Right. Yeah, they were pretty good at redemption stories, which are great, but hers
Yes.
was by far the best.
Yeah.
Definitely. Hunter, do you have another favorite?
Well, it's been mentioned quite a few times, but I really did like the musical episode. And I know
Yes.
it's not my top favorite, but I really did enjoy it. I loved hearing Colin sing because he has an amazing voice. But yeah, so that's on my list.
One of the ones that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think yet, but is probably on everybody's list, is when Emma breaks the curse by kissing Henry.
True.
Yeah. Good old season 1.
I remember when I introduced my mom to the show, I decided that she had to watch the show right before season 3 began. So we binge watched the first 2 seasons. And when we got to the end of season 1, Henry flatlines and they're taking his equipment off of him. And my mom just starts crying and goes, "Well, he's not dead, is he? You can't end this season that way. You can't kill the kid." And then Emma kisses him and brings him back to life. And that was, I think, my mom's favorite moment. And she kind of waffled on the show after that. But that one is just so classic.
I love the fight that she had with Regina during that episode as well. It's true, isn't it? So good.
That whole moment was so shocking at the time. Emma believed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because there had been so much lead up. Like, I think the episodes directly before that had been some of my favorites at the time, before we had so many things to choose from. Like, I loved The Stranger and I loved Hat Trick.
Yeah.
And I loved the banter between Jefferson and Emma, of him just trying to get her to believe. And then August and Emma, him trying to get her to believe. And she just didn't want to believe because she didn't want to be the savior. And I think that
Yeah.
was a big moment for her character development as well.
I forgot a really important favorite that some people are going to hate me for.
Go for it.
Graham's death.
Did you look at my notes?
No,
That's under most tragic death.
Oh, well, I suppose it was both. They are both. I remember, though, there had been, believe it or not, a lot of question as to whether Regina was even awake, for sure.
Yep.
We knew we were supposed to think that she was, but we weren't positive that she actually was. And so all in one big epic scene, she gets mad, she reveals her vault, she reveals the heart, and she crushes it and uses magic and kills Graham. And it was for a brand new show that you weren't sure if they were going to be bold, which they were not really that bold with killing main characters, to, after such a short run, kill someone who was central to the show up to that point was really incredible. And then there was a 6-week gap before the next episode, and we knew it.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I remember, because we were just, I think that was, I'm trying to remember, that might have been, we played catch up with the podcast at first.
Yeah.
And that might have been the first episode that we got to watch when it aired.
Yeah.
Because we had finally recorded all the podcasts up to that point, and we were all sort of literally freaking out. I'm pretty sure the beginning of that episode is really funny to listen to. So it has to be a favorite, as tragic as it was.
Yes. I have it under most tragic death rather than favorite death. But, well, and I think I actually searched for a GIF of that when I sent out my tweet last night that was Emma crying. I was looking for that GIF of Emma crying because that was like the best one. And I know you guys, you couldn't even say his name on the podcast forever.
It's true.
Still now, I can't believe you just said that. I'm just kidding. Kind of, a little bit, maybe. Daniel, do you have any more favorites?
The final battle. Not that it
Which one?
not the actual final battle, but that it happened. I remember when the author was there saying, "Oh, it's the last page. It's the final battle." That was one of those moments when I think I cheered at that because it's like, yes, finally, we're finally going to get the final battle. The thing that I've been expecting since the very first or second episode of Once Upon a Time. And to finally have it was great, although it was a bit of a letdown, but that it happened. I was happy about that.
Final battle was to season 6 what beignets were to season 7.
Yeah.
At least in terms of dialogue.
I just remember when I first started listening to the podcast, you guys talked about whether you were going to hold the pilot to that. And then that kind of became a theme. And then finally we got it. Well, Rumpel's speech in the pilot is so epic when he talks about the final battle. How could they not have one?
Right.
That'd be silly. Although it wasn't the final battle because then we had a whole other season. But
Once Upon a Time superlatives.
Right?
I actually have the spin-off 2.0, aka season 7, as one of my favorites, mostly because there was some really good acting and there was some really good writing. And although it was kind of like, what did you guys call it? The epilogue. There were still some really good moments, and I feel bad that we probably, other than this, weren't really going to mention it. But I loved, we did mention it. We talked about Alice and Nook and those storylines, but I loved Alice's speech to Gothel right before she gave her the magical smackdown. And Snow
I
and
pretty
Charming
much loved everything about her.
about Alice, like every
Yeah.
line she ever said.
Well, no,
Yeah.
like her character, like everything. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just on my notes. It says loved Tilly.
Yeah.
So
And then, of course, Snow and Charming's entrance and Baby Hope.
Yeah.
Jeremy, do you have more?
Yes.
Okay. Take it away.
I think my favorites list wouldn't be complete without the soundtrack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Much in a similar way, maybe more so in Lost in some ways. They used to say in Lost that the soundtrack was a character. And a lot of the time in Once Upon a Time it was that way too. The music is just probably going to be with me for the rest of my life in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The motif of Rumpel smashing up the Dark One's castle, that music that is playing when he's just, nobody could ever love me, and just smashing up his castle.
Oh, yeah.
And you're flashing back to Storybrooke and he's beating up Mo. Oh, that to me is the best musical moment in Once. Like, Mark Isham just completely outdid himself there. It's so beautiful and heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Hunter, do you have more to say?
no.
I'll mark you complete.
Whoa. That is how we came to be. That's how we came to an end.
Jeremy, what's another least favorite?
Ooh.
Or a few. Oh, or only one.
Yeah. I consider killing Balefire to be kind of a least favorite. It was just, if not the killing, the way it was done. It was so strange.
Yeah.
I believe Jacqueline has a comment on that.
I think we're all waiting for me to talk now, right?
Yeah.
So I wrote this at the forums, and I'm kind of just going to read a little bit about what I said over there, but I will go down swearing that killing Neil was the biggest mistake the show ever made. It's not a secret that I'm a hardcore Swanfire shipper, but in the end, this isn't even about relationships and who Emma would end up with. Because if the writers chose to go with the Captain Swan route, then so be it. Honestly, I'd live with it, whatever. But killing Neil and then acting as if he didn't exist, which is what happened a lot of the time, and as if his loss wouldn't complicate the world, the characters, and the interactions between those characters, to me was just always utter nonsense. Every time Rumpel did something incredibly stupid or evil, Neil should have been there. Every time Emma and Regina needed to do something that involved Henry, Neil should have been there. You can have Neil be the unifying factor between the original Hook and Rumpel, like Alice did with Nook and Rumpel, which is where I actually think they got the idea, is it's the story they wanted to do with Balefire, but couldn't. And then, in season 6, the race to save adult Gideon would have been far more interesting, with Neil trying to help his brother see their father in a better light, because who better to reach out to Gideon than the boy that Rumpel literally let go of and dropped down a portal. And for me, there was, for me, there was always a way to keep Neil alive and involved in the story without having to ruin whatever relationship the writers decided to go with. Like, they didn't need to kill him in order for an end game to occur. And it just made everything tinged a little bit darker. My criticisms of the show just became so more vocal once he died, because he just should have been there. He was the reason for the curse. He's the reason Rumpel sent all of this in motion. If Emma's a lost girl, then he's a lost boy. Her parents are trying to find him. His father's trying to find him. Like, there were so many parallels, and you didn't need a romantic relationship to see them. I would have liked one, obviously, but yeah, killing Neil is my most tragic death and my least favorite moment and my least favorite episode.
And in an alternate ending imagination, imagine if Rumpel had gone out putting his heart into Neil to save his life.
Right?
Giving up his power finally
Yeah.
for Neil. And yeah.
Someone, I think it was H.J. Bow over at the forum, said that while the Nook and Alice thing in the series finale was really powerful, just imagine if that had been like Neil holding on to Henry or something, and Rumpel seeing that, and I mean instantly remembering everything that had happened. Like, it's a much more powerful image, because you have these cycles of abandonment in the show, and one of the big themes has always been we have to break those cycles of abandonment. And so Rumpel would never let his own son lose his son. So yeah, Neil's death is going to go down as the thing that I regret the most.
You say that like you're responsible.
It's because she didn't get that job as the nerd in their writer's room.
Someday, when I invent time travel, I will find a way to go back to Los Angeles and sit them down and just be like, look, there's a way we can do this, I promise.
Hashtag hire the nerd.
Jeremy, what's your last point there?
I also have in my more than 5 list of favorites the show's general focus on family and community, and sometimes that looks the way you expect it to in a fairy tale, and sometimes, maybe more often, it just doesn't. There's someone missing or someone you don't expect in the mix, and sometimes they're related and sometimes they're not. And they just go through all of it together with hope.
Yeah. I think that part of season 1 was kind of demonstrating that. Like Mary Margaret and Emma were family before they knew they were family. Because they had chosen to be family. And that was in Hat Trick, I think.
Hat Trick. Yes. I
When-
was just thinking of that exact moment.
Yeah, when Emma had left and Mary Margaret was like, I don't remember what she said, but she said something so profound. I was going to quote a different episode, but yeah.
I think you're thinking of the moment in Hat Trick when she saves Mary Margaret from Jefferson, and Emma says, "I cannot lose that. I cannot lose my family."
Yes.
And Mary Margaret looks at her and goes, "Your family?" And Emma instantly corrects herself and goes, "Friends, whatever." But you know that in that moment, Emma absolutely meant family.
Yeah. It was the closest thing to family she had ever had.
Yeah.
It was great. Oh, I don't want to end on a downer and ask you to finish your least favorites. Jeff.
No, I know. That's why I was like, yeah, we could maybe just skip this.
I'll
That's
have another
fine.
favorite.
Okay.
By the time she finishes.
Okay.
Okay. Jacqueline, what are your last sort of least favorite moments on your list?
Some of them I think other people have touched on. So the retcons or continuity that got shuffled around because it fit the story currently being told better. I've said before that season 5A is my very least favorite, and I hated all the twists in the Dark One mythology, suddenly having 2 Dark Ones. That just, nope. I was not about that. And then, since you brought up earlier, one of your favorites was the spinoff, Once Upon a Time in Wonderland. One of my least favorites was when they attempted to bring Jafar, played by a totally different actor, but still the same character, over into the main show and then just completely underutilized him. And he was so boring and devoid of life, whereas he was one of the highlights in the spinoff. And I really, as much as it pains me to say it because I love Karen David and I adored her in Gallivant, the Aladdin and Jasmine storylines were just not good.
Yeah, they were a little pointless, I think. It was like one of those things where they brought them in, like Michael Sacca bringing in the Knave of Hearts / Will Scarlet. Like, there didn't seem to be a lot of foresight into that.
Yeah.
I have one favorite to close us out. Actually, it's kind of a collection of favorites. I loved it every time we got to see farther back in history. Until we discovered too far back in history. So, too far. But like getting to see Rumple and how he became the Dark One. And then later it was getting to see a Dark One before that, or getting to see Peter Pan rather how he came to be, and then getting to see Dark Ones before that, getting to meet Merlin and how magic came to that realm, and going farther and farther back like that. That was so cool to me, to stretch the timeline and see more of that backstory, not just character development, but plot development. How did this plot even come to be? I really liked those moments.
Or even seeing the beginning of Storybrooke.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One of my favorite episodes. Yeah. Welcome to Storybrooke. Seeing that pop into existence.
And seeing Graham again.
Aww.
Back before he died.
Jeremy Laughlin. Or Laughlin.
Nope.
Erin, you want me to take over now?
Yes, please.
She's like, take it, please.
I was gonna put that in chat, but I was like, he's closing anyway, so.
Well, this has been a wonderful ride. These 7 years that we've been podcasting, and If our discussion hasn't made you cry yet, get ready. I want to thank every hero who's ever contributed financially to the podcast. And I believe this is a complete list. And the support we've received over the years, the feedback and the financial support. I mean, some people like Lisa Slack, you've heard her in almost every single episode of the podcast. She's contributed a lot to a free podcast about a free TV show. Sometimes I even wonder, does she know she's still contributing money to the podcast? But I mean, we're talking thousands of dollars that she's given us. So huge thanks to Lisa Slack. And here is our complete list of heroes. Amy Catalier, Amanda Rubar, Ann and Michael Mateson, Anna Marie Rivera Simon, Anthony Gonzalez, Arjun, Ashley Reed, Blue Rose, Bobby Polasek, Bridget J., Bryant Ban, Callie Foster, Chris Tipton, Chris Zeiger, Christina Haley, also known as Fire and Ice, Cindy Barrick, David Newland, David Williams, Deb Blissick, DG, Diana, DJ Firewolf, Aaron J. and Marie, remember them, the Uckley Duglings? Aaron Nunnally, Aaron O., Genevieve Miller, George Farrow, Greg Shope, Holly Brown, James Kinslow III, Jamie Moran, Jed Anderson, Jeannie Root, Jennifer Treese, Jessica Abel, Jessica Olson, Jessica Retzlaff, Jill, Julia Portella, Justin Peterson, Kelsey Hunt, Kristen Schmidt, Kyra Hawkins, Laura Silva, Lori Hancock, Lori Ann, Lisa Rutledge, Lisa Slack, Mel Core, Mark Stapleton, Marianne Levati, Matthew Rimmer, Melanie, Neil from Western Kentucky, Paul Dickinson, Peter Pan and the Windy Bird, Rebecita, Rose Marie Mason, Samantha, Sarah Pitzer, Sheila Clifton, also known as Sackrick, Sheriff Graham, Inzi, Steph Witz, Swan Got Hooked, Sweets, Talia Roth, Tammy Tappenbird, and Timothy Peters. Thank you so much for your support. It's been amazing, the financial support we've received, and thank you to the hundreds of people who sent us feedback over these 7 years. And I wish I could name everyone, but that would take way too long. We've received so many good theories and feedback and suggestions and encouragement and constructive criticisms and so many podcast reviews and Apple Podcasts and in Stitcher and other places and so many tweets and followers and positive responses and messages from people asking where the podcast is because they're excited to listen to the podcast, and the encouragement of those people who have said, you keep me watching the show, and the encouragement from those who have said things like, you help me through difficult times in life because I know that you guys are like family and friends, and I can laugh with you guys no matter what's going on in life. And we've received so much feedback that at times we needed help sorting it and putting it into place. So I'm very grateful to the past help we had in Slurpees 108, Corbin and Steve for sorting our feedback, and in processing screenshots that we've taken, hundreds of screenshots from different episodes over the 7 years. Jacob and Jack helped a lot with that. All of those who wrote show notes for us, Dan, Jeremy, Jenny, Winnie Lee, and especially Jack for writing so many of our show notes and putting up with our late nights and odd hours since she's in the Philippines. And John Buchanan for editing our episodes and taking that huge burden off of me. And our guest writers on the blog that we've had over the years. I forgot to mention Aaron writing some of our show notes too, but some of our guest writers, Melissa Cavalo, Jed Anderson, Corbin, Lindsay, Matthew Paul, Slurpees 108, Time Spacer, Winnie Lee, and Hunter Hathaway and Jacqueline for providing our spoilers, and Matthew Paul contributing to that often, and Jacqueline and Matthew Paul moderating the forums for us. Aliascape was our chat moderator for quite a while, and she'd always turn off the lights for us when we were finished. Keb doing an amazing job masterminding the timeline and making sense of a lot of these confusing things and putting it all together for us. And my co-hosts, Jeremy Laughlin, Aaron, Dan Flynn, Heather Ordover, Hunter Hathaway, and Jacqueline hosting this podcast with me. And thanks most of all to my beautiful wife, Jenny, whose support, laughter, and love, both on the microphone and off, has meant the world to me. And so, for one final time, I speak from all of us, from the bottom of our hearts, to say thank you, have a happy ever after, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a happy ever after.
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 And thanks for listening.
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 Oh, I love you, Jacqueline.
Did Heather record a voice for that? There was like a voice I didn't recognize.
I was surprised that I didn't have as much instant recognition of every voice as I should have.
I only recognized my own voice in the last line.
I heard myself twice.
That's so funny. Ah, that was lovely.
Mm-hmm. That was a really nice thing that Daniel put together. I was all of a sudden like, oh, conceal, don't feel.
Don't let
Put on a
know.
show.
Make one wrong move and everyone will know.
Oh, and it is far too fitting that our post show would start to be Frozen references.
Why not?
Oh my goodness.
Okay, I absolutely 100% need to turn on the air conditioner again.
Oh,
I've been
Stop
sitting here
recording.
sweating so much. Yeah, I need to stop recording.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, that's
wait, John, this is the last thing I am ever going to send you, I think. So, bye.
I'm sorry, John.
I'm sorry, John.
Sorry, John.
That's
Sorry,
it,
John.
Oncers.
Do.
Did you hear that, Jacqueline? In our podcast?
I was so happy that he left it in our initial reactions. I was like, yes.
Because we do that literally at the end of every recording.
And it never makes it in.
No.
This is going where?
And thank you to everybody who joins us for the live show.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this thing was 3 hours.
I have 2 hours and 4 minutes on mine.
Yeah, mine's 3 hours and 2 minutes.
Oh wait, let me weigh in.
So John will get it sometime next week.
Right?
3
After
hours
it
and
goes
2
through
minutes.
customs. Yeah.
3 hours and 2 minutes. I expected this.
Yeah, I mean, we did pause a lot as well.
Yeah. The final run will probably be like, what, 2.5 maybe?
Don't know. It's there's a lot of good stuff there.
There is.
Erin, thank you for organizing everything.
Yes.
Like, yeah, you made this work. I think
Thank
I was just
you.
like, we've got so much great feedback, and I don't know where to start, and I'll just read it all starting from the beginning. Okay, here we go. That's what would have happened. So
I kind of get like that, and then I need to be like really firm with myself and not like. I know I'm serious though. Like I need to be really like, Erin, stop. You know what to do. Just do it. Just stop thinking about doing it for a week and actually do it, and then you'll be fine.
can that be a podcast of just you talking to yourself like that?
Sure, like motivational podcasting.
Well, I don't know. I found a whole list yesterday of topics that Jeremy and I were going to podcast about. And then did we call a segment like Canadian Grocery of the Week or something?
I don't remember. It definitely needed to just be Canada versus America, which I don't have anything for the post-show topic this time. Other than that, it was fun that you said bean instead of bin.
What, me?
B-E-E-N.
Bean. Ben.
Ben.
Both. I think it depends on the context. Just like sometimes I say project and sometimes I say project.
Because it wasn't something I ever noticed before, but when you were reading feedback, I was like, Canadian.
That's PHLEGON. Sorry, I was doing.
Remember the time when
I'm tweeting right now, but I was putting that, and that's a wrap, and I was tagging everyone, and I'm like, wait, what is his? Oh yeah, that's PHLEGON.
That's so funny. We didn't give our contact information this time.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember the time when Jeremy wasn't podcasting and Daniel said, and you could follow me? And then I was like, and then I like started to say that I'm Jeremy Laughlin.
It's so funny the way the brain works like that. Because like you can do this every week, and then once in a while I forget who I am. I start to say it like something's different. I start to say a name, and I'm like, nope. Mm-mm.
Well, I changed my Twitter handle, and the first time back, I was trying to do it, and Jacqueline was like, "You don't know your own Twitter?" I'm like, "I don't remember this one. Hold on."
I think I started to say I was Daniel one of our first unsupervised episodes, just because Daniel's name went there, and I just.
So the line that I was trying to remember, the everything is from Spring Awakening, the musical.
Oh.
Okay.
Which is like possibly the only appropriate line that could have been said.
Yeah.
But it's from the very first scene when she's talking to her mom. And her mom is trying to convince her that a stork brought her sister the baby.
The baby.
The baby. Now I'm trying to find it because I have the script open. But she basically just goes like, oh, the mom doesn't give a true answer and goes, there, now you know everything. And she was like, everything? And then she's like, everything. And then the next song takes over.
I'm glad that you're not going to be tormented for the rest of your life about this information.
Very dramatic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you guys stop your recordings already?
Yes.
Yeah, mine's already in the Dropbox.
Okay.
Mine is
Shush.
not.
Shush you and your fast internet.
Sorry.
Mine
Well,
might
that's
be in
'cause
the
everyone's
Dropbox by
asleep.
3 a.m.
That's because everyone's asleep. My husband fell asleep, and so I'm the only one on the internet right now.
Yeah, that doesn't matter in my house.
That's
Oh.
so funny.
All right.
Well,
I
at
could
least
be
he
the only
should
one
be
in the
asleep.
country on the internet, and it's still gonna not work.
Besides uploading to Dropbox, is there anything else? I really have to go to the bathroom. And this isn't me being like, okay, we're never gonna talk to you guys ever again. Bye.
Right.
But like,
Podcaster problems.
yeah.
You should be wearing your Depends. Come on.
Secret pro tips from Hunter.
Those are pregnant tips, not secret pro tips.
That's fantastic.
I don't even want to talk about politics this
No,
week, guys. Guys in
no.
chat, just I can't. I was triggered.
I was triggered.
Well,
But I'm
remember
going to go
Jeremy
because I'm exhausted and my 2-year-old likes to wake up around early.
Yeah.
around early.
Around early.
So,
Early o'clock. Okay, well, we'll have to have a reunion podcast sometime, you guys.
Yeah.
10 years from now, we're all gonna get together
No.
and discuss the show again.
Yes.
Right.
yeah.
Rewatches.
When we're protesting the reboot?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's like Henry's great granddaughter.
Can you believe they're bringing back Charmed?
When
I'm-
you
I-
mentioned the word we don't say around Aaron.
I
No,
think
I
it's
already ranted.
ridiculous.
It's dumb. Just go to Holly Marie Combs' tweets about it.
Oh, I've
Have
seen
your
it.
opinion.
Oh, yeah. No, I've read them.
Yeah. Not my Charmed.
Yep.
Okay,
And
well,
not
you
my
guys
Slayer.
have a...
Because they're
No.
also talking about Buffy rebooting.
No!
No.
I know. I know.
No.
That can be our
That's-
next podcast. We can like watch it, make fun of it, how horrible it is.
And we can go
The
back
three
to
of
the
us.
original one.
Yeah.
Let's rewatch the original shows instead of that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm out. You guys have a great night. It's been
Good
fun.
night.
Night, Hunter.
Good night.
I am also going to head out.
Okay.
Again, with the previously mentioned need for a restroom. But
Whose corner, not a troll? Is that Doc?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense.
I will probably talk to you guys later.
All right, Jacqueline.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Belfry Management would like you to play all of the clips on the soundboard.
Oh,
Hee hee.
good grief. I would love that too. Ooh, there are a lot of them, though. I don't know if you even know. So I'll leave out the ones I've already played. And I can leave out the songs because we've just heard them and they're amazing. I almost, if I'd been faster, I would have played
Your questions are pointless.
at some point. I really wish I'd hit a few of these. Because those are wonderful. Do you remember this happening a lot?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I suppose you have a point.
This one was particularly appropriate in certain situations, but we didn't really use it much because it's so specific.
I thought it would take weeks and weeks of battles and twists and turns, and there you go doing it, day one.
Actually, it wasn't that specific.
Yeah, I think we've used that a few times.
Yeah, this one was kind of appropriate, but long, I think.
Let's not worry about the end of the story, okay? Endings usually suck. Let's just enjoy the middle.
But we're way past that. I'm popping a lot. I don't know why that's happening all of a sudden.
Funny you should ask, can you read?
Ooh, what's this?
That's an excellent question, but one I'm not going to answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that Adam or Eddie?
Right.
Huh.
I love that one.
You are delusional and speaking gibberish.
You were miss like season 1 Mary Margaret.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. What's this?
I don't know, David. I don't have all the answers.
Oh my. That's fantastic. Ooh, long one.
The infant is our only hope. Get the child to safety. Get the child to safety, and on its 28th birthday, the child will return. The child will find you. And the final battle will begin.
7 years later, apparently.
Oh, I have to screen cap that thing.
we do.
I think my Slack crashed as a total sidebar. Oh no, it's in. Here we
Would have been nice to know about all the pesky details.
Oh, that song.
Oh, that song.
Oh, that song.
Okay, Yoda. Enough riddles. What's the truth?
Who is that?
Lily.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why I forgot.
Let's see. Ooh.
What?
I think 2 more.
Pretty clever.
Ooh, that's a good one, actually.
Oops. I just accidentally started a Moana song.
Complicated story. The timelines alone would make one's head spin. Only a true author could weave such a tale.
Is that the last one?
I think so. I think that's
Here's
the last
the
one.
Will Anna theme song. Okay, I screen capped that and I'm going to send it to Jack for our show notes.
Ah.
And I probably also have to go. Since I'm 30 minutes over my time in this room.
Is that right?
It's right, all right. And we started pretty much on time tonight, which is fantastic.
And because some people are asking, Corella was the one who said what? Well, we sort of talked about Canada and America.
Pardon?
We sort of talked about Canada and America.
Well, people are just, like there's a lot happening right now with that. I'm still like...
Oh, I didn't mean politics. I just meant like groceries.
Oh, just life. But we also had a big election last weekend that, or on Thursday that, like I can't even... I
can't talk about it yet.
Yeah. I think we had talked about that it was coming up and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did not go the way that I was hoping.
Clearly.
or the second best choice.
Oh.
Possibly not even the third best choice. Like,
ooh,
yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Don't even. I hope you're joking, WWO. But then, and then this week with all this stuff that's going on, like with... I'm just glad our relationship has nothing to do with politics.
Right.
But I shared a really funny commentary by a U.S. op-ed that's quite funny, but it's really just making fun of Canada.
Oh, no.
In like a funny way, in a bantering way.
Yeah.
Oh, and then my sister-in-law just texted me and said, I just watched The Grayswear, and then insert really sad moment here. So, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Toxin.
Why can't everybody be lucky like us Americans? Are you saying we have bad accents? I think my Canadian accent is pretty on point.
I think he's referring to the politics.
I know.
Oh. Oh, you were looking at something else.
Yeah.
Ew.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start my upload, and maybe it'll be there by the time I leave in the morning.
All right.
And we just need to make a plan to do a podcast next week so that I'm not like saying
Right?
bye.
Right? That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It's weird.
We got through though.
We did. Yes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here. This is gonna be one of those like, no, you hang up. No, you hang up.
I know.
Until my mom walks in and is like, I need the room. Like the president. I need the room.
I need the room. All 50 of you, get out. The two of us need to talk. That's what always happens in movies.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Scandal. Well, I'm sure I'll see you for unboxing and for our podcast that we're going to plan.
Yes.
With the topics that I already have listed. The first one is vaccines, and I don't know where that came from.
Oh, well.
I was like, did we talk about this, or did I just decide that Jeremy and I should talk about this?
You probably just decided we should talk about it. I think there are a couple on topics on there. So
Yeah,
maybe we'll,
probably.
I don't know what the main topic will be or what, but we'll do something.
Yeah.
We'll at least
Cool.
do like hangouts or something.
Yeah.
You must have
Yeah,
started your
for
upload
sure.
because suddenly you sound like a
I did.
intoxicated robot version of you.
Which happens only half the time when I start my upload. So.
Yeah, actually, it cleared up again already. So.
Oh, sweet. For now.
Yeah. Well, we should probably say goodbye to the chat and go off air.
Oh yes, goodbye chat.
Oh,
There's still 13 people in chat.
I know, they're all here. I mean, 2 of them are us, but they're all here. and I like, even though she didn't say it right, well, she said it probably better, but even Hudgebao got. Do you remember we used to say that all the time? She got mentioned.
Which one?
Hudgebao. She's
No.
another Heather, but she used to be in all the live stuff, and Jacqueline mentioned her from the forums, but so many of our faithful live chatters are here right now.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Well, I say it with that like conviction, like it's gonna help. But
all right.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.
You chatters, hang up. All right. We'll stop the broadcast. Good night, everyone.
Good night.